Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was the only male in the world of DxD and got lots of girl for mating? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The World Unmanned. The air in the abandoned sector of Kuo Town tasted of rust and ozone. It was a flavor Rias Grimori had come to associate with trouble. She stood on the fractured pavement of a derelict plaza, her crimson hair a slash of defiant color against the gray, skeletal remains of office buildings. Before her, reality was coming apart at the seams. It wasn't a violent tear, not the sore. A stray fallen angel might make punching through from one plane to another. This was quieter, more profound, and infinitely more disturbing. The space above the plaza's dry, cracked fountain shimmered like heat haze on a summer road. But it gave off a palpable cold that bit at the skin. The distortion was the size of a double-decker bus, and it hummed a low, guttural note that vibrated deep in Rias's bones. The energy signature is incoherent, Akano Himahima murmured, her violet eyes narrowed in concentration. She stood at Rias's right, a placid smile on her face that did nothing to mask the tension coiled in her posture. It's not demonic, angelic, or draconic. It's not like anything on the archives. It feels organic, alive. Can you contain it? Rias asked, her voice calm and level. She was a king, the heiress to the Grimori clan, and fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially not in front of her peerage. Perhaps, but it's like trying to cup water in a sieve. There are no patterns to lock onto. Akano's smile tightened. Whatever this is, it's playing by a different set of rules. On her left, Zenobia Quarta shifted her weight, her hand resting on the hilt of the holy sword Durandal, which was wrapped in consecrated cloth. Her blue hair was cut short, practical, much like her worldview. Then we should stop playing and start cutting. A threat is a threat, no matter the origin. Patience, my knight, Rias said, her gaze fixed on the anomaly. We don't know what we're dealing with. That's exactly why we should hit it hard and fast. From behind them, a softer voice piped up. Please be careful, everyone. Asia Argento, her blonde hair and gentle disposition a stark contrast to the grim surroundings, clutched a small medical kit to her chest. It feels sad, and very, very tired. Kaneko Tuju, the smallest of their group, simply watched the rift with wide, unblinking hazel eyes, her fists clenched at her sides. She said nothing, a silent sentinel of coiled power. The hum intensified, rising in pitch until it was a physical pressure against their eardrums. The air crackled. The shimmering distortion began to bulge outward, stretching thin like a soap bubble. Rias felt a primal instinct scream at her, the same instinct that told a creature to flee before a tsunami. She braced herself, crimson demonic energy flaring to life around her hands. Positions. Now, her peerage moved as one, a seamless unit honed by countless battles. Akano rose into the air, arcs of holy lightning crackling at her fingertips. Zenobia unwrapped Durandal, its saker. Ed aura pushing back against the encroaching dread. Kaneko's hands and feet were bathed in a white light, her diminutive form belying the immense physical power she was ready to unleash. Asia stepped back, a golden-green aura of healing magic at the ready. The world went silent for a single, heartbeat-skipping moment. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric and shattering glass, the rift ripped open. It didn't explode. It was worse. It disgorged something. A figure, tangled in what looked like ribbons of pure, golden light and visceral black sludge, tumbled out and crashed onto the concrete with a sickening thud. The rift snapped shut behind it, the sudden silence as jarring as the noise that had preceded it. For a long moment, nobody moved. The figure lay in a heap, unmoving. It was a person. Dressed in tattered black and a lurid shade of orange, its clothes were ripped and stained with blood, both fresh crimson and dried, darker patches. One of its arms was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a deep gash ran from its temple down its cheek. Rias took a cautious step forward, her peerage fanning out to flank her. The scent hit her first. It was alien. Beneath the copper tang of blood, and the sharp scent of ozone from the rift, there was something else. Something musky, earthy, and utterly foreign. It was a scent she had only ever read about in ancient texts, a biological marker T. Had vanished from their world over a century ago. President, Akino whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. What is that? The figure stirred, groaning. The sound was deep, rougher than any voice they had ever heard. It pushed itself up with its good arm, shaking its head as if to clear it. Blonde hair, matted with dirt and blood, fell across its face. When it finally looked up, its eyes were a startling, electric blue. And its face, the jaw was sharper, the brow heavier, the entire structure subtly, yet fundamentally, different from any they had ever seen in person. It was male. The Hot crashed into Rias's mind with the force of a physical blow. A male, not a magically constructed homunculus, not a golem, not an illusion. A living, breathing male creature. They were extinct, wiped out by the Great Fade, the divine plague that had culled every last Y chromosome from every species, human and supernatural alike. Yet here one was. He blinked, his blue eyes struggling to focus on the 5 figures surrounding him. He looked confused, not hostile. He opened his mouth, and a string of guttural, unfamiliar words came out. It wasn't the language of humans, devils, or angels. Zenobia didn't wait for an explanation. To her, unknown was synonymous with enemy. With a battle cry, she lunged, Durandal swinging in a blur of holy light aimed to incapacitate, not kill. The on from the stranger was instantaneous and utterly breathtaking. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise a shield or prepare a counterspell. He simply dropped. His entire body went limp, falling backward to the ground with impossible speed. Letting the lethal arc of Durandal slice through the air where his neck had been a millisecond before. In the same fluid motion, he kicked his legs up, hooking them around Zenovia's wrist and using her own momentum to flip her clean over his head. Zenobia, a master swordswoman, a veteran of countless fights, was thrown through the air like a training dummy. She landed hard on her back 10 feet away. The air knocked from her lungs, her expression a mask of pure shock. Zenobia, Asia cried out. Before anyone else could react, the male was already moving. He sprang back to his feet, not with a push, but as if yanked upright by an invisible wire. His dislocated arm snapped back into its socket with an audible, sickening pop that didn't even seem to register on his face. His blue eyes, now sharp and clear, darted between them, assessing, calculating. There was no fear in them. Only a weary, bone-deep readiness. Era, Akino purred from above, though her voice lacked its usual playful lilt. He's fast. She raised a hand, and a bolt of golden lightning, thick as a tree trunk, screamed down from the sky. The stranger didn't even look up. He blurred, a flicker of orange and black so fast Rias almost missed it. The lightning struck the spot where he had been standing, blasting a crater in the concrete. He reappeared a dozen yards away, crouched low to the ground. Kaneko, Rias commanded. Kaneko was already a blur of motion. She shot forward like a cannonball, her fist cocked back for a blow that could shatter a mountain. The stranger met her charge head-on. Just as she was about to connect, he slapped a hand on the ground. There was a puff of smoke, real, tangible smoke, and suddenly, there were 2 of him. One of them took Kaneko's punch directly to the jaw. Its head snapped back, and then its entire body dissolved into smoke. A clone. Kaneko's eyes widened in surprise at the bizarre magic. The real one was already behind her, a single finger pressed gently against the back of her neck. He didn't strike. He just held the position, a clear and undeniable checkmate. Kaneko froze, a cold sweat breaking out on her skin. She could feel the raw, concentrated power humming beneath that single point of contact. It felt like a miniature sun. He spoke again, his voice low and steady, the unfamiliar language carrying a clear tone of warning. He released Kaneko and straightened up, his gaze finally settling on Rias. He saw the command in her posture, the energy swirling around her. He recognized her as the leader. Rias held up a hand, signaling Akino and a recovering Zenobia to stand down. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was a warrior, and a highly skilled one. Brute force wasn't working. It was time for a different approach. Who are you? She asked, her voice imbued with the authority of her station. He just stared, his head cocked slightly. The language was a barrier. Rias sighed internally. This was a complication. Focusing, she began to weave a simple translation spell, a delicate string of demonic power that she extended toward him. It was a risk. If he perceived it as an attack, this could all go sideways again. His eyes widened as the magic washed over him, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. He felt the gentle probe, analyzed its intent, and to Rias's immense relief, he allowed it. A soft red glow enveloped his head for a second and then faded. He took a deep breath, wincing as the movement pulled at the wounds on his torso. He tried again. Where am I? His voice was a rough baritone, a sound so alien and yet so fundamentally natural that it sent an involuntary shiver down Rias's spine. The words were Japanese, the language of the town they stood in. The spell had worked. You were in Kuo Town, Japan, Rias answered, keeping her tone even. A more pertinent question is, what are you? He gave a short, humorless laugh that turned into a grimace of pain. Last I checked, I was a person. Name's Naruto Uzumaki. He scanned the area again, his gaze lingering on the skeletal skyscrapers. Doesn't look like any Japan I've ever seen. What happened here? This sector was abandoned years ago, Rias said, deflecting the question. She needed information, not the other way around. You came through a dimensional rift. Where are you from? Naruto's expression soured. A battlefield. The answer was curt, final. It spoke of trauma he wasn't willing to share with strangers who had just tried to kill him. He looked down at his tattered clothes, at his bleeding hands. A deep, profound exhaustion seemed to settle over him, weighing down his shoulders. The adrenaline of the fight was fading, and the reality of his situation, his injuries, his confusion, his utter isolation, was setting in. We don't want to hurt you, Rias said. A half-truth. But your appearance here is an anomaly. You are an unknown variable, and I cannot allow you to roam free. Naruto's eyes narrowed. So what's the plan? Lock me up. Dissect me. That depends on you, she replied smoothly. Cooperate, and we can be accommodating. Resist, and my peerage will be forced to restrain you. As you have already seen, they are quite capable. It was a bluff. He had handled her entire peerage, her elite, hand-picked servants, with an ease that terrified her. He had been injured, exhausted, and disoriented, and he had still moved like a force of nature. If he truly wanted to fight, Rias wasn't sure they could stop him without leveling half the city. Naruto seemed to weigh his options. He looked at Zenobia, who was now standing. Durandal held in a defensive grip, her eyes blazing with suspicion. He looked at Kaneko, who was rubbing her neck, her usual stoicism replaced by a rare look of caution. He saw Akano, still hovering, lightning dancing between her fingers. Finally, he looked at Asia, who alone seemed to be looking at him not as a threat, but as a person in pain. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated sympathy. That seemed to be the deciding factor. He slowly, deliberately, raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Fine, he said, the single word laced with weariness. No more fighting. I'm too tired for this crap anyway. The tension broke, but only slightly. Zenobia didn't lower her sword. President, we can't just trust him. She protested. We don't know what he's capable of. We have a glimpse. Rias corrected her gently. And it's because of that glimpse that I am not willing to press this into a true battle. He is not our enemy. She turned her full attention back to Naruto. My name is Rias Grimori. This is my peerage. Akano, Zenobia, Kaneko, and Asia. You will come with us. You have my word that you will not be harmed as long as you remain peaceful. It was a monumental gamble. Her orders were to investigate the anomaly and report back. If the other factions, the fallen angels or, God forbid, heaven, discovered she had found a living, breathing male and hidden him, the political fallout would be catastrophic. It could be seen as an act of war, an attempt by the Grimori clan to hoard the single most valuable prize in the universe for themselves. But as she looked at him, at this impossible creature who had fallen from the sky, she didn't just see a political asset or a biological miracle. She saw a chance, a desperate, insane, infinitesimal chance for a future that her entire generation, and the one before it, had been denied. Heirs, lineage, the simple, biological continuation of their species. For 100 years, Devil Society had been held together by magic, politics, and sheer stubbornness, but everyone knew they were on a slow, inexorable march toward extinction. And this man, this Naruto Uzumaki, could change everything. The risk was enormous, but the reward was the survival of her entire race. It was a gamble a king had to be willing to take. Akeno, Rias said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Prepare a transport circle. We're not going back to the clubhouse. We are going directly home. To the estate. Akeno's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before her serene mask slipped back into place. The Grimoire estate in the underworld. This was a far greater secret than she had anticipated. As you wish, President. A complex, crimson magic circle began to glow on the ground, its intricate runes spinning to life. Naruto watched it with a practiced, wary eye. And where is home? He asked. A place where you will be safe, Rias said. And a place where you can be contained. She gestured for him to step into the circle. He hesitated for a moment, then complied, walking to its center. The rest of her peerage followed, forming a loose circle around him. Rias could feel their thoughts, their shock and apprehension, through her bond with them. They understood the magnitude of her decision. They didn't all agree with it, but they were loyal. They would follow her lead, even if it led them to ruin. As the light of the teleportation circle intensified, Rias took one last look at the battered, impossible man standing before her. His presence was a cataclysm, a seismic shift in the foundations of their world. There he would be their salvation or their damnation, she did not know. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. In a place that was no place, outside the flow of time and the boundaries of dimensions, 5 shadows gathered around a pool of liquid starlight. The pool swirled, showing not reflections, but a crystal-clear image of the ruined plaza, of the Mson-haired devil girl and the impossible blonde man disappearing in a flash of red light. The figures were cloaked and hooded, their forms indistinct, their faces lost in absolute darkness. They were ancient, older than the devils and the gods who now squabbled over the scraps of creation. A voice, like the grinding of tectonic plates and the rustle of withered leaves, spoke. It is done. The seed has been planted in fertile soil. Another voice, this one like the hiss of steam from a volcanic vent, followed. The Grimoire girl is foolish. Driven by the biological imperative she so desperately denies. She will nurture him, protect him. She will forge him into the key, said a third, its tone like the cracking of glacial ice. Her possessiveness will keep him from the others, give him time to root himself in this new reality. And when he is strong enough, whispered a fourth, a sound like the sighing of a dying wind, his unique energy, the energy of a world beyond our warden's reach, will be the catalyst. He will not reinforce the lock, as the angels hope. He will shatter it. A fifth voice, silent until now, spoke with the weight of primordial gravity. It was the voice of command, the voice of the abyss. Let the Grimoire girl have her prize. Let the factions plot and posture. They are but dust motes dancing in the dawn of our return. The great fade was but the tilling of the field. Now, the true harvest begins. The first mothers will soon awaken. And this world, this flawed, broken creation, will be unmade and woven anew in our image. The shadows stirred, a collective, silent agreement. The image in the pool of starlight faded, returning to a placid swirl of silver and black. Their work, for the moment, was done. The most crucial piece was on the board. The sensation of teleportation was disorienting. A nauseating lurch of being turned inside out and reassembled. Naruto stumbled as his feet found solid ground, his hand instinctively going to the kunai pouch on his leg. It was still there. Good. He took a moment to get his bearings, his senses on high alert. The air was different, heavy, thick with an energy that felt like the air before a thunderstorm. The sky above was not a sky. It was a swirling expanse of deep purple, dotted with constellations he had never seen and 2 moons, one lavender and one a sickly green. He was standing in a vast courtyard, paved with obsidian stone that seemed to drink the strange light. Before him stood a palace, a sprawling structure of crimson towers and Gothic spires that clawed at the purple sky. It was a place of immense wealth and ancient, arrogant power, but it wasn't the palace that held his attention. It was the people. The courtyard was filled with them. Hundreds of them. They stood on the balconies, lined the grand staircases, and filled the open spaces around them. All of them were female, And all of them were staring at him. There were maids in crisp uniforms, guards in elegant, polished armor, and nobles in exquisite gowns. Their faces were a mixture of expressions: shock, disbelief, raw, undisguised hunger, suspicion, and in the eyes of the older ones, a deep, soul-shaking awe that bordered on religious reverence. The silence was absolute, a crushing weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes fixed on him and him alone. The air crackled with a tension that was part hope, part fear, and part awe. Primal need that Naruto had never encountered before. Rias Grimori stepped forward, her voice ringing out in the oppressive silence. From this day forward, she announced, her voice magically amplified to carry across the entire courtyard, this man, Naruto Uzumaki, is under the protection of House Grimori. He is our guest. He is not to be harmed. He is not to be touched. He is not to be approached without my express permission. Am I understood? A collective, hesitant murmur of assent rippled through the crowd, but their eyes never left him. Naruto stood his ground in the center of it all, his face a neutral mask, but inside. His mind was racing. He had faced down armies. He had fought gods. He had stared into the eyes of monsters that could shatter mountains. But he had never felt anything like this. This was a different kind of pressure, a different kind of danger. He was the only man in their world. And in that moment, under the weight of 1,000 desperate stares, he felt less like a guest and more like the last piece of bread in a starving land. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Grimori Gambit. The teleportation spell deposited them in the heart of the lion's den, and the silence that followed was louder than any battle cry. Naruto stood his ground, his senses expanding, cataloging the hundreds of life forces around him. They were all powerful, all alien, and all focus. Ed on him with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. He met their stares, his own gaze unwavering, his face a mask of calm neutrality that betrayed none of the turmoil within. He was alone, wounded, and stranded in what was clearly another dimension, surrounded by beings whose power was on par with the strongest shinobi he had ever known. Freaking out wasn't an option. Rias's declaration of protection was a calculated move, and he recognized it for what it was, a claim of ownership. She was drawing a line in the sand, not for his benefit, but for hers. He was a resource, a prize, and she had just announced to her entire clan that he belonged to House Grimori. It was a bold play, and he had to respect the audacity, even if it put him squarely in the center of a political cage. Graphia, Rias called out, her voice cutting through the lingering tension. A woman materialized from the shadows of a grand archway. She was impossibly elegant, dressed in the immaculate uniform of a head maid. With long silver hair braided down her back and crimson eyes that held a chillingly calm intelligence. She moved with a liquid grace that spoke of immense, restrained power. She bowed, a perfect, economical movement. My lady, this is Naruto Uzumaki, Rias said. He is our guest. Please see to it that our finest chambers are prepared for him. And have a medical team on standby. Graphia's gaze slid to Naruto. It was not a look of awe or hunger like the others. It was an assessment, cold, clinical, and thorough. She catalogued his injuries, his posture, the strange energy radiating from him. For a fleeting second, her composure wavered, a flicker of profound surprise in her crimson eyes, before it was ruthlessly suppressed. At once, Lady Rias, she said, her tone perfectly even. She turned to Naruto. If you would please follow me, Lord Uzumaki. The title was a formality, but it was also a test. Naruto just gave a slight nod. He wasn't a lord, but arguing the point here and now was pointless. He followed the silver-haired maid, acutely aware of Rias and her peerage falling into step behind him, a royal procession with a foreign curiosity at its center. The crowd of onlookers parted before them like the sea, their whispers following him like the rustling of leaves. The inside of the palace was even more opulent than the exterior. Ceilings vaulted so high they were lost in shadow. Walls hung with tapestries depicting battles between monstrous creatures and warrior women, floors of polished marble that reflected the eerie purple light of the underworld sky. It was a monument to old power and older money. The chambers Graphia led him to were larger than any apartment he had ever lived in. A vast bedroom with a canopied bed big enough for 10 people, a sunken bath that looked more like a small swimming pool, and a balcony that offered a panoramic view of the sprawling Grimori territory. "A physician will be with you shortly," Graphia said with another bow. "Should you require anything, you need only ask." She then turned to Rias. "Lady Venelana has been alerted to your unscheduled return. She awaits you in the Grand Hall." She was most insistent. Rias's expression tightened. "Of course she was. Thank you, Graphia." The head maid vanished as silently as she had appeared. Rias turned to her peerage. "Asia, stay with him. Tend to his injuries. The rest of you, with me. It seems I have some explaining to do." Akeno gave Naruto a lingering, curious smile before she departed. Zenobia shot him a look of pure, undiluted suspicion, her hand never straying far from Durandal's hilt. Kaneko just watched him for a moment, her face unreadable, before turning to follow her king. That left him alone with the blonde girl, Asia. She seemed impossibly timid, wringing her hands as she looked at him. Then at the opulent room, then back at him. If you would please, have a seat. I can begin the healing," she stammered, her cheeks flushed. Naruto felt some of his own tension ease. Of all the super-powered women he had met so far, she was the only one who didn't seem to view him as a threat, a prize, or a puzzle to be solved. She just saw a person who was hurt. He managed a small, tired smile. "Thanks." He sat on the edge of the ridiculously large bed, shrugging off the tattered remains of his jacket. He hissed as the movement pulled at a dozen different cuts and deep bruises. Asia hurried over, her hands hovering over his back. "This may feel a little strange," she warned. A warm, gentle green light bloomed from her palms. It felt like sinking into a hot spring after a week-long mission. The pain didn't just dull, it evaporated. He could feel his torn muscles knitting back together, the skin over his cut sealing itself shut. He twisted his shoulder, the one he'd popped back into place, and felt no lingering ache. "That's incredible," he said, genuinely impressed. "It's a different kind of healing than I'm used to. It's called Twilight Healing," she explained, her confidence growing as she focused on her work. "It's a power I was gifted. It can heal devils, angels, and humans alike." "Devils, angels," Naruto repeated, filing the information away. "So that's what you are. The girl with the red hair, Rias, she's a devil." "Yes," Asia said, moving to tend to the gash on his face. "We are all devils, part of her peerage. Well, except Zenobia. She used to be human. A member of the church, but it's complicated. Everything seems to be," he muttered. He looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "And the whole, no men thing. Is that true? Am I really the only one?" Asia's hands faltered for a second. A shadow passed over her gentle features. "It happened a long time ago. Before I was born. They call it the Great Fade. A plague, a curse. No one knows for sure what it was. It swept across the world, affecting every race. Humans, devils, angels, dragons, every single male, gone. Within a single generation, they all just vanished. We've managed to continue through magic, creating artificial heirs, but," she trailed off, her voice growing quiet. "But it's not the same. The noble houses are dwindling. Our future is uncertain." Naruto was silent, absorbing the sheer, world-altering gravity of what she was saying. A world without men, not just a village, not just a country. An entire world. The scale of the loss, the loneliness of it, was staggering. It explained the looks he had received in the courtyard. It wasn't just lust or curiosity. It was the desperation of a people staring into the abyss of extinction. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. He knew what it was like to be the last of something, to carry the weight of a legacy. Asia finished her healing, the last of his injuries fading away. You're not what I expected," she said softly. "What did you expect? The old stories, the histories, they depict males as being aggressive, dominating, overly proud." She blushed. "You fought my friends, but you didn't. You weren't cruel. You were just defending yourself." Naruto gave a short, wry laugh. "I've had my fill of fighting. And cruelty doesn't win wars. It just makes more enemies." He stood up, stretching. His body felt whole again, the exhaustion replaced by a familiar thrum of energy. He felt Kurama stir within him, a low grumble of curiosity and deep-seated suspicion. This place stinks of crows and snakes, Naruto. The fox's voice echoed in his mind. And the women are powerful. Be careful. Always he sent back, his focus returning to the room just as the grand doors swung open. A woman who could only be Rias's mother stood there. She had the same crimson hair, but hers was styled in an elegant updo. She wore a regal gown of deep purple that accentuated a figure that had clearly defied the ages. Her violet eyes, the same shade as her daughter's, held an unnerving combination of aristocratic grace and razor-sharp intellect. This was a woman who commanded empires from a ballroom. So, Venelana Grimori said, her voice a smooth, cultured alto, "You are the miracle my daughter has gambled her future on." Down in the grand hall, the confrontation was already underway. Rias stood before her mother. The matriarch of the house of Grimori, her chin held high. Akino and the others stood a respectful distance behind her. "Explain yourself, Rias," Venelana said, her voice dangerously calm. "You were sent to investigate a minor energy fluctuation. You return, without warning, directly to the heart of our home, with him. His name is Naruto Uzumaki," Rias replied, her tone firm. "He is from another dimension. He is, for all intents and purposes, the last living male in existence." Venelana's fan snapped shut. The sound echoed in the cavernous hall like a gunshot. "Do you have any idea what you have done? You have brought the key to the survival of our entire race into our home without consulting anyone. You have hidden a strategic asset of immeasurable value. The other houses will see this as a blatant power grab. The sea trees will demand access. The Bales will claim prior rights due to ancient blood pacts. The Phoenix clan will likely declare war on us by morning. Let them," Rias shot back, her own power flaring around her, a crimson aura of defiance. "For a century, our people have been slowly dying. We squabble over politics and pretend our stop-gap magical solutions are a future. They are not. He is. I saw an opportunity and I seized it. Is that not what you taught me to do? I taught you to be a strategist, not a reckless gambler." Venelana countered, taking a step closer. "This man, we know nothing about him. He could be a weapon, a Trojan horse sent by some unknown enemy. His power is an unknown quantity. What if he cannot be controlled? He's not a beast to be controlled." "Mother," Rias said, her voice lowering. "He's a person, and a warrior. His power is immense, but it is disciplined. He disabled my entire peerage without causing a single serious injury." That gave Venelana pause. She glanced at Zenobia, who still looked furious, and Kaneko, who was uncharacteristically pensive. "Is this true?" Akino stepped forward, her smile as serene as ever. "He is quite skilled, Lady Venelana. He moves with a speed and precision I have never witnessed. His techniques are bizarre, but undeniably effective." Rias is not exaggerating. Venelana's gaze returned to her daughter. "His skill is irrelevant. His biology is what matters, and you have made him a Grimori asset. The moment news of this breaks, and it will break, every single power in the underworld, in heaven, and in the Grigori will be at our gates. You have painted a target on the back of our entire clan, Rias. Then we will face them," Rias said, her resolve hardening. As the house of Grimori. For a long moment, mother and daughter stared each other down, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Venelana let out a long, slow breath. A flicker of something that might have been pride softened her features before being replaced by shrewd calculation. "Fine," she conceded. "What's done is done. The Grimori gambit, then. We will shelter him. We will study him. And we will control the narrative. For now, he is to be treated as a guest, but he is not to leave this estate. His existence is the most important secret in the world, and we will protect it with our lives." Her eyes narrowed. "And Rias, you will be responsible for him. His actions are your actions. His failures are your failures. Do you understand the weight of that?" "I do," Rias said without hesitation. "Good," Venelana said, turning her attention to the rest of the peerage. "Go. Get some rest. You have a difficult road ahead." As they left, Venelana remained, her mind already spinning a complex web of political maneuvering. She had berated Rias for her recklessness, but deep down, a part of her was thrilled. It was a move she might have made herself in her youth. High risk, galactic scale reward. The Grimori clan had always been known for its audacity. Now, they were the keepers of the future. The most powerful house in the underworld. Assuming, of course, they could survive the fallout. Naruto's first few days in the Grimoire Palace were a masterclass in suffocating hospitality. He was given anything he wanted: food, clothes, training facilities, but he was never, ever left alone. His every move was watched. Maids would find reasons to dust the same suit of armor for an hour just to be in his presence. Female guards would follow him at a discreet distance, their eyes tracking his every step. He would catch young noblewomen peeking at him from behind pillars, their faces flushed with a mixture of fear and fascination. It was like living in a fishbowl filled with very powerful, very curious sharks. He handled it by creating a routine. Mornings were for training. He found a secluded garden courtyard and used it to meditate and practice his katas. It was during these sessions he began to truly understand his new environment. The very air was saturated with a strange energy, demonic energy, he supposed. It was different from the natural energy he used for Sage Mode, but it was energy nonetheless. He wondered if he could learn to harness it. It was on the third day that Rias and her peerage approached him during his training. "Your movements are strange," Zenobia said bluntly, foregoing any greeting. "They lack the solid stances of swordsmanship or the brute force of a brawler." Naruto finished his kata, his movements flowing like water. "It's called taijutsu," he said, not breaking a sweat. "The art of the body. It's about efficiency, not just power." "Akano mentioned that you are skilled," Rias said, stepping forward. "She also said you use bizarre techniques. Clones made of smoke. Shadow clones," he corrected. "They're solid, not smoke. A useful tool for distraction and reconnaissance." "I would like a demonstration," Rias stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Of your true capabilities. I need to know exactly what kind of power I am harboring in my home." Naruto arched an eyebrow. "You want me to fight your friends again? Didn't work out so well for them the first time." Zenobia's hand went to her sword. "I was caught by surprise. It will not happen again." "Fine," Naruto said with a sigh. It was better than sitting around being stared at. A sparring session would break the monotony and allow him to gauge their growth. He could sense they were holding back before. "But let's set some ground rules. This is a spar, not a deathmatch. The goal is to learn, not to injure." He looked at each of them in turn. "Zenobia, you first." The knight grinned, a fierce, predatory expression. "With pleasure." They took their positions in the center of the courtyard. Zenobia drew Durandal, its holy power flaring to life, a stark contrast to the demonic energy of the underworld. "I will not hold back," she warned. "Wouldn't want you to," Naruto replied, settling into a low stance. Zenobia charged, a blur of blue and silver. Durandal was a terrifying weapon, each swing unleashing waves of pure, destructive holy energy. Naruto didn't try to meet it head-on. That would be suicide. Instead, he moved. He was a ghost, a flicker of orange. He flowed around her attacks, using the flat of his hand to deflect the blade's trajectory, letting her own momentum carry her past him. He was always just outside her reach, a frustratingly untouchable target. Frustrated, Zenobia roared and brought the sword down in a massive overhead chop, intent on cleaving the entire courtyard in two. Naruto didn't retreat. He shot forward, moving inside her guard. Before the blade could reach its apex, he slapped two fingers against the inside of her elbow and a palm against her wrist. It wasn't a strike. It was a precise, targeted application of force. Zenobia's arm went numb. Her grip slackened. Durandal, the legendary holy sword, slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the stone floor. Naruto was already behind her, a single kunai, drawn so fast no one even saw him move, held loosely against her throat. The courtyard was silent. "You rely too much on your sword," Naruto said calmly, his voice next to her ear. "It's your greatest strength and your biggest weakness. You leave yourself wide open." He withdrew the kunai and stepped back. Zenobia stood frozen for a moment, then slowly turned, her face a mask of disbelief and something else. Grudging respect. "How? Speed beats power," Naruto said simply. He turned to the petite, white-haired girl. "Kaneko, your turn." Kaneko nodded, her face impassive as she stepped forward. She didn't say a word, she just exploded into motion. Her fighting style was the polar opposite of Zenobia's. It was pure, unadulterated physical force. Every punch and kick carried the force of a freight train. The ground cracked with every missed blow. Naruto met her head-on, but not with strength. He used the principles of the gentle fist he had copied from Hinata and Neji. He parried her blows, redirecting her incredible force, using her momentum against her. It was like watching a raging river being diverted by a series of precisely placed stones. Then, he went on the offensive. He didn't use clones or ninjutsu. Just pure Sage Mode enhanced taijutsu. His movements were too fast for her to track, his strikes too precise. He didn't hit hard, he hit smart. He targeted her balance points, her joints, her momentum. Within 30 seconds, Kaneko found herself on the ground, tangled up in her own limbs. With Naruto's foot resting gently on her back. "You're strong," Naruto said, offering her a hand up. "Probably stronger than anyone I've ever met in a straight fistfight. But you're predictable, you telegraph every move." Kaneko took his hand, her usual stoicism broken by a look of genuine curiosity. She was studying him, analyzing him in a way she hadn't before. My, Akino purred, stepping forward as Kaneko retreated. "It seems I am last. Shall we dance, Naruto-kun?" Lightning crackled around her. This fight was different. Akino was a long-range fighter. She flew into the air, unleashing a torrent of holy lightning from above. Naruto was forced to move, dodging and weaving between the bolts that blasted craters in the ground. "You can't run forever," Akino called out, her smile widening. "Who's running?" Naruto retorted. He slammed his palm on the ground. Shadow Clone Jutsu. A dozen Narutos erupted from puffs of smoke, scattering in all directions. Akino's lightning incinerated them one by one. But they served their purpose. While she was distracted, the real Naruto was weaving hand signs. Wind style. Rasenshuriken. He created the devastating attack in his hand, a miniature, screaming typhoon of chakra blades. But he didn't throw it at her. Instead, he slammed it into the ground in front of him. The attack detonated, not with a physical explosion, but with a massive hemispherical blast of wind that kicked up a huge cloud of dust and debris, completely obscuring the entire courtyard. Akino's senses were overwhelmed. She couldn't see, and the swirling wind and raw energy played havoc with her magical senses. Suddenly, she felt a presence directly behind her, in midair. "Boo!" Naruto whispered. She yelped in surprise and spun around, but he was gone. He had used the dust cloud and her momentary distraction to leap into the air, feint an attack, and then use a body flicker to get back to the ground. By the time the dust settled, he was standing exactly where he had started. A faint smirk on his face. He had won without ever landing a blow. Akino descended, her expression a mixture of fascination and frustration. "You are a very irritating man to fight, Naruto-kun." "That's the point," he said, letting his technique dissipate. Rias had watched the entire display in silence, her mind racing. He was more than she had imagined. He wasn't just powerful, he was a strategic genius. He had analyzed and dismantled each of her peerage members, exploiting their specific weaknesses with surgical precision. He hadn't used any catastrophic, overwhelming power, just skill, speed, and tactics. It was terrifying, and it was intoxicating. Satisfied, Naruto asked her, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "I am beginning to understand," Rias admitted. "The scale of what you are." In a darkened chamber, deep in the hidden corners of the underworld, a single candle flickered. A kneeling figure, shrouded in a black cloak, finished their report. "He defeated the Grimoire peerage single-handedly. My lady, all three of them. He used no recognizable magic, only strange physical arts and techniques. His power is immense, his speed unnatural. The Grimoire clan keeps him under lock and key." Before the spy stood a woman, her features sharp and severe, her eyes burning with a cold, righteous fire. This was Lyra Belial, leader of the Sterile Crown. "So, the corruption has a face," Lyra said, her voice dripping with contempt. "The Grimoire harlots would seek to bring back the age of weakness, the age of masculine filth, all for the sake of their pathetic bloodlines." She clenched her fist. "They see him as a savior. A stud to sire a new generation. I see him for what he is, a disease. A plague that must be sterilized before it can spread." She turned to her assembled followers. their faces hidden in the shadows. The Grimoire clan has spit upon the purity of our new world. They have embraced a relic of a failed past. We will not allow it. Send word to our allies. Prepare our forces. We will march on the Grimoire Palace, and we will purge this male corruption from existence. For a clean world. For a pure world. For a pure world. Her followers chanted, their voices echoing in the darkness, a promise of holy war. That night, Naruto couldn't sleep. The purple sky and its alien moons were a constant reminder of how far from home he was. He stood on his balcony. The cool night air a small comfort. The view was unsettling at first, but it grows on you. He turned. Rias was standing in the doorway, dressed not in her usual uniform, but in a simple, elegant nightgown. It's different, he admitted. I miss seeing the stars I know. She walked to stand beside him, her gaze on the sprawling Grimoire lands below. I cannot imagine what it must be like for you, she said softly. To be torn from your home, your world, to be thrust into ours. It's a lot to take in, he said with a wry smile. Especially the part where I'm suddenly an endangered species. Rias didn't smile. To many, you are more than that. You are a symbol, a hope, a future. That is a heavy burden to place on one person. Tell me about it, Naruto muttered, thinking of the child of prophecy moniker that had haunted him for years. Burdens are something I know a thing or two about. You carry a pretty heavy one yourself, don't you? Leader of a powerful clan, responsible for all these people. Her composure softened, a hint of vulnerability showing through. The Grimoire name carries expectations. My entire life has been planned out for me. Alliances, political marriages, before the great fade. My future husband was chosen for me the day I was born. Now, she gestured vaguely at the world around them. Now, I lead, I fight, I try to hold back the tide of our extinction. It is an exhausting burden. Quote, they stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two leaders from different worlds finding a strange, common ground. You're not what I expected either, Naruto said, echoing Asia's words. When I first saw you, I thought you were just an arrogant noble. But you care about your people. You risked a lot to bring me here, not just for your clan, but for them. It was a necessary gamble, she said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. And the consequences are already beginning. As if on cue, a crimson magic circle flared to life in the center of Naruto's room. Graphia stepped out of it, her face grim. She held a formal scroll, sealed with a crest that depicted a seven-headed serpent. My ladies, Graphia said, her voice grave. A summons from Lucifod, from the Mao herself. She unfurled the scroll. Lady Searsx Lucifer commands that Rias Grimoire, and the dimensional anomaly in her possession, present themselves before the Devil Council. Immediately, Rias's face went pale. The time for secrets was over. Her gamble had just been called by the most powerful woman in their world. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Judgment in Lucifod. The air in the Grimoire Grand Teleportation Chamber was thick with unspoken anxiety. The massive magic circle inscribed on the floor pulsed with a crimson light, a hungry, waiting maw that would deliver tea. Hemmed to the heart of the underworld's power structure. Rias stood straight and tall in her formal Grimoire attire, a deep red dress that projected an image of regal confidence she didn't entirely feel. Her peerage stood behind her, a silent wall of support. Zenovia's hand was a white-knuckled grip on Durandal's hilt, while Akino's smile was a fraction too tight to be genuine. Naruto was the calmest one in the room. He wore the new clothes they'd given him, simple black pants and a dark orange, high-collared shirt that was more practical than formal. They had offered him robes, but he'd refused. He wasn't one of them. And he wouldn't dress like one. He was a shinobi of Konoha, and he would face this council as himself. Let me be clear about what we are walking into, Rias said, her voice low. And urgent as Graphia made the final adjustments to the teleportation matrix. The Devil Council is comprised of the heads of the 72 pillars, the great noble families of the underworld. Above them are the four great Satans, the Mao. They are the absolute rulers. Their word is law. Sounds like a cage summit, Naruto commented, his arms crossed. Just with more fancy titles. Their power is not just political, Rias pressed, her crimson eyes locking onto his. Searsx Lucifer, the leader of the Mao, is my older sister. But do not mistake that for a guarantee of safety. In that chamber, she is not my sister. She is the ultimate authority. Her power is said to rival that of the biblical God. She is a being of pure destruction. Do not provoke her. I don't plan on provoking anyone, Naruto replied evenly. But I'm not going to kneel, either. Rias's lips thinned. That was what she was afraid of. His unbreakable will was his greatest strength, but in a room full of ancient, prideful devils, it could also be a fatal flaw. Just let me do the talking. At least at first. Understood, Graphia announced, stepping back from the circle. The channel to Lucifod is stable. We are linked to the council's antechamber. Rias took a deep breath. It's time. She led the way into the circle. Naruto followed, feeling the familiar, unpleasant pull of the teleportation. The world dissolved into a crimson blur. And a moment later, solidified with a jarring lurch. The air was different here. The raw demonic energy was 1,000 times more concentrated, a crushing pressure that would have brought a lesser being to their knees. It was like standing at the bottom of a deep ocean of pure power. They were in a cavernous antechamber of black marble and gold filigree. Towering, 8-foot, tall guards in intimidating obsidian armor flanked a set of massive golden doors. They didn't even glance at Rias or her peerage. Their helmed gazes were fixed entirely on Naruto, their surprise and suspicion a palpable force in the room. Lady Grimori, one of the guards boomed, his voice echoing. The council is in session. They are waiting. Without another word, the two guards pushed the golden doors inward. They opened silently, revealing the chamber beyond. The Devil Council chamber was an amphitheater of power. Tiers of black stone seats rose up into the shadows, each one occupied by a matriarch or acting head of a noble house. Naruto could feel the weight of hundreds of ancient, powerful eyes falling upon him. They were the stairs from the Grimori courtyard magnified 100-fold, stripped of their awe and replaced with cold, calculating scrutiny. In the center of the chamber floor, on 4 ornate, throne-like chairs, sat the rulers of this world. One was a woman with long, flowing crimson hair even more vibrant than Rias's. This had to be Searzek's Lucifer. Her beauty was breathtaking, but her power was suffocating. It rolled off her in waves, a calm, placid ocean that you knew could become a world-destroying tsunami at any moment. Beside her was a woman who looked like a magical girl from a manga, with twintails of black hair and a frilly dress. She was pouting, but her playful demeanor did little to hide the immense, chilly power she radiated. Seraphal Leviathan. The third was a woman with glasses and an intellectual air, her focus on a complex magical projection hovering in front of her. Ajuka Beelzebub. The fourth was a woman who was, remarkably, fast asleep, snoring softly on her throne. Falbium Asmodeus. Venelana Grimori sat in a prominent seat in the first tier. Her face an unreadable mask of aristocratic calm. She gave Rias a single, almost imperceptible nod. Rias stepped forward and knelt. My lords, the Mao. I have answered your summons. Searzek's Lucifer's eyes, the same shade of crimson as her sister's, drifted from Rias to the man standing behind her. Her expression didn't change, but the ambient pressure in the room skyrocketed. So the rumors are true, she said. Her voice soft, yet it carried to every corner of the vast chamber. You have found a male. The moment the words were spoken, the chamber erupted. An outrage, shouted a stern-looking woman with the Bale family crest on her robes. The Grimories hoard this miracle for themselves. The right of propagation should belong to the strongest houses. The great King Bale has a prior claim. He is a scientific anomaly of unprecedented value. Countered Ajuka Beelzebub, her eyes finally lifting from her projection, alight with intellectual fire. He must be studied. His genetic makeup, the nature of his energy, it could hold the key to reversing the Great Fade. He should be placed under the care of my research division. He's so cute. Seraphal Leviathan squealed, clapping her hands together. We should make him the underworld's official mascot. I can design a costume for him. This is no time for jests, Seraphal, a cold voice cut through the noise. It came from a duchess in the upper tiers. A woman named Vapula. This being is an unknown. An alien. His very presence could be a poison to our world. He is an unnatural force that has disrupted the purity we have fought so hard to maintain. Perhaps the only safe course of action is to eliminate the threat before it can fester. The Duchess's words cast a chill over the room. They echoed the fanatical rhetoric of the fringe elements. The sterile crown. To hear such an extreme view-given voice in the High Council was shocking, and several heads turned in her direction. Eliminate him. Venelana Grimori's voice was like Arctic ice. You speak of destroying the single greatest hope for our people's future, Duchess Vapula. A strange position to take. I speak of caution, Vapula retorted smoothly. Huff, a flicker of fanaticism shone in her eyes. Of protecting what we have built. The bickering intensified, a cacophony of voices all talking about Naruto as if he were a piece of property, a weapon, or a laboratory animal. They debated his fate, his value, his rights, or lack thereof. Through it all, Naruto stood silent, his expression unreadable, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the council. Memorizing crests and picking out the key players. Rias tried to argue, to plead her case that he was under Grimori protection, that he was a guest, but her voice was lost in the sea of political maneuvering. Finally, Naruto decided he had heard enough. He took a single step forward. He didn't shout. He didn't flare his energy. He just moved, and the simple action carried such a weight of pure pose that the entire chamber fell silent. Every eye was locked on him. You've all had your say, he said, his voice calm and clear, yet it resonated with an authority that had nothing to do with magic. You've talked about me, argued over me, and decided my fate a dozen times over. Now I'm going to talk. And you're going to listen. A collective gasp went through the chamber. No one, addressed the council in such a manner. Naruto's blue eyes met the crimson gaze of Sears's Lucifer. There was no fear in them. No arrogance. Just an unshakable statement of fact. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I am not a miracle. I am not a specimen, and I am not your property. I was brought to your world by forces I don't understand. I understand your situation. I understand your desperation. I have seen my own world brought to the brink of destruction. I know what it means to fight for a future. He paused, letting the words sink in. I will not be a stud for your breeding programs. I will not be a lab rat for your scientists. And I will not be executed to satisfy your fears. I am a free man. And I will be treated as one. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and dangerous. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his speech had stunned the entire council into submission. He had seized control of the room with nothing but his will. Sears's Lucifer leaned forward on her throne, a slow, dangerous smile gracing her lips. The look in her eyes was no longer just curious, it was fascinated. A free man, she repeated softly. A bold claim for one who stands alone in a world full of beings that could erase him from existence with a single thought. Being alone doesn't mean I'm weak, Naruto countered. And I have a feeling that erasing me would be harder than you think. Oh, I have no doubt, Searsx said. Her smile widening, she glanced around the chamber, at the stunned and furious faces of the house leaders. She saw the impasse. She couldn't just give him to one house, it would cause a civil war. She couldn't have him dissected, it would be a waste. And after a declaration like that, she couldn't simply order him to do anything. He had a warrior's pride. That, she understood. You have placed us in a difficult position, Naruto Uzumaki, she said. You claim freedom and strength. The devils of the underworld only respect one of those things. Strength. So, you will have the opportunity to prove it. She stood up, her presence dominating the chamber. A trial by combat, she declared, her voice ringing with finality. A time-honored tradition to settle disputes that cannot be solved by words. You will face a champion of our choosing in the grand arena. If you are victorious, the council will grant you a measure of the autonomy you demand. You will remain under the care of House Grimori, as a protected guest, not a prisoner, while we consider the future. If you lose, she left the alternative hanging in the air, the threat unspoken but absolute. A murmur of excitement and approval rippled through the council. A duel was a perfect solution. It was a spectacle, a test, and a definitive assertion of power. Do you accept these terms? Searsx asked, her crimson eyes boring into Naruto. Naruto didn't hesitate. This was a language he understood far better than politics. I accept. The transition from the council chamber to the arena was jarring. One moment, he was in a den of politicians. The next, he was standing on the sand-swept floor of a colossal amphitheater. The scale of it was mind-boggling, larger than any stadium he had ever seen. Every seat was filled. Hundreds of thousands of devils, their faces broadcast on massive magical screens, were screaming, chanting, their collective energy a roaring sea of sound and emotion. He stood alone in the center of the vast expanse. The purple sky and its two strange moons looming above. The weight of an entire world's expectations was on his shoulders. He could feel Rias and her peerage watch, hing from a protected balcony high above. Their anxiety was a sharp, stabbing presence in his senses. A grand, gilded gate on the far side of the arena began to grind open. A hush fell over the crowd. A moment of held breath before the explosion of sound. And now, a magically amplified voice boomed across the stadium, "Let us welcome the pride of the underworld. The undefeated champion of the rating games for 10 consecutive years. The wielder of the unholy power of destruction. The scion of the great house of Baal, Sela Baal." A woman strode out of the gate, and the crowd went insane. She was tall and powerfully built, with short cropped black hair and piercing golden eyes. She wore a suit of form-fitting black and gold armor that did little to conceal the raw, corded muscle beneath. Waves of pure, destructive power rolled off her, a visible, crackling aura of crimson and black that warped the very air around her. She carried no weapon. She was the weapon. Her golden eyes locked onto Naruto from across the arena floor. They held nothing but contempt and predatory arrogance. She was the champion, the apex predator of this world, and he was just a strange new animal that had wandered into her territory. This was his test, not just a fight for his freedom, but a statement. Here, in front of the entire underworld, he would show them exactly who and what he was. He wasn't a prize. He wasn't a symbol. He was a shinobi, and he was the strongest. He closed his eyes for a second, taking a deep, calming breath, feeling the familiar hum of Kurama's chakra mixing with his own. The roar of the crowd faded away. The immense pressure of his opponent's power became just another environmental factor to be analyzed and overcome. He opened his eyes. They were sharp, focused, and ready. The duel for his future was about to begin. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Shinobi's Art. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that washed over the arena. Sela Baal stood, bathed in the adoration and expectation of her people, a smirk of supreme confidence on her face. She cracked her knuckles, the sound amplified in the charged atmosphere. A pulsating, crimson-black raw of the power of destruction flared around her, causing the very sand at her feet to hiss and disintegrate. She was a walking embodiment of annihilation, the final word in any argument. "So, you're the male," she sneered, her voice dripping with condescension that carried easily across the intervening distance. "Don't worry, little anomaly. I'll make this quick. I wouldn't want to damage the Romori's new toy too badly before they get to play with it." Naruto didn't reply. He simply shifted his weight, settling into a relaxed, almost lazy-looking fighting stance. He let the noise, the pressure, and her taunts wash over him. In the eye of the storm, a shinobi had to be the calm. He centered himself, feeling the vast reservoir of his own chakra, a deep, cool well of blue, and beneath that, the molten, incandescent ocean of Kurama's power, waiting, watching. He wouldn't need the fox for this. This was a test of his own skill. A massive horn sounded, its baleful cry signaling the official start of the duel. Sela didn't waste a second. With a contemptuous flick of her wrist, she unleashed a sphere of destructive energy the size of a boulder. It wasn't aimed, it was simply thrown in his general direction. A casual display of overwhelming force. The attack screamed through the air, leaving a trail of warped space in its wake. The crowd roared its approval, expecting him to be vaporized on the spot. Naruto moved. He didn't use a grand technique or a burst of speed. He just took a single, precise step to his left. The sphere of raw chaos shot past him, missing by a scant few inches, and slammed into the arena wall miles behind him. The resulting explosion was silent for a moment before the sound arrived, a deafening crack that shook the entire stadium. A huge chunk of the wall, hundreds of tons of enchanted rock, simply ceased to exist. Sela's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. A lucky dodge. That's all it was. She launched another blast, and then another, her mauve, Emmett still casual but with a growing hint of irritation. The dance began. Naruto became a ghost. For the next minute, he did nothing but evade. He never moved more than was absolutely necessary. A slight tilt of his head. A quick sidestep, a short hop. He flowed around the torrent of destruction like water flowing around rocks. To the untrained eye, to the screaming crowds, it looked like he was terrified. A cornered animal desperately dodging the inevitable. They began to boo, to jeer at the coward who refused to fight back. But Rias, watching from the royal box with her heart in her throat, saw the truth. Her peerage saw it too. He's not just dodging. Zenobia breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. Look at his feet, his movements. There's no wasted energy. He's reading her, Akino added, her usual playful smile gone. Replaced by an expression of intense concentration. He's learning the rhythm of her attacks. The charge time, the velocity, he's downloading her entire fighting style. On the arena floor, Naruto had all the data he needed. Sella was powerful, absurdly so. But she was also arrogant. Her attacks were straightforward, relying on brute force to obliterate any obstacle. She was a sledgehammer in a world that had never seen a scalpel. He decided it was time to change the tempo. As Sella gathered energy for another massive blast, Naruto blurred. He vanished from his spot, using a burst of pure speed that was faster than most of the audience could track. He reappeared directly in front of her, well inside her effective range. Her golden eyes widened in shock. No one had ever willingly closed the distance with her before. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't try to land a devastating blow. He simply struck her sternum with his open palm. It looked almost gentle, but at the moment of impact, he discharged a tiny, precisely controlled pulse of his own chakra. It wasn't a destructive force, it was an invasive one. Sella's body seized up. The massive sphere of destructive energy she had been gathering imploded, sputtering out with a pathetic fizz. The foreign chakra Naruto had injected into her system was like a static shock to her magical circuits, momentarily disrupting her control. She stumbled back 2 steps, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on her face. Her chest didn't hurt, but she felt violated. The attack hadn't been aimed at her body, it had been aimed at her power. The entire stadium fell silent. A pin dropping would have sounded like a thunderclap. Their champion, the invincible Sella Bale, had just been forced backward. Naruto didn't press the attack. He flowed back, putting distance between them again, his face calm, analytical. He had confirmed his theory. Her power was immense, but her control over it was crude. She wielded it like a club. Sella's shock morphed into pure, incandescent rage. Her pride, more than her body, had been wounded. The crimson-black aura around her exploded outward, doubling in intensity. You little insect. She roared. I'll tear you apart molecule by molecule. Shadow clone jutsu. In a series of identical puffs of smoke, the arena floor was suddenly flooded. 100 Narutos stood there. Each one with the same relaxed stance, the same calm expression. Sella froze for a second, momentarily confused by the bizarre magic. Tricks, she bellowed. You think you can win with parlor tricks? She began to unleash her power indiscriminately, sending out massive waves of destruction that tore through the clones. Each one she hit vanished in a puff of smoke. She cackled, a sound of mad fury, as she blasted them apart one by one. Is this all you have? Illusions. This was exactly what Naruto wanted. The smoke from the destroyed clones wasn't dissipating in the still arena air. It hung there, a thick, swirling cloud that obscured vision and baffled magical sensors. Hidden within the chaos, the real Naruto was flying through hand signs. Serpent, ram, boar, tiger, earth style, mud wall. A massive wall of solid rock, 10 feet thick and 50 feet high, erupted from the arena floor, bisecting the battlefield and completely cutting off Sella's line of sight. Enraged, she obliterated it with a single blast. But it had served its purpose. Before the dust from the destroyed wall had even begun to settle, a new assault began. Wind style. Great breakthrough. A gale force wind roared through the arena, kicking up the sand and the smoke from the clones into a blinding, choking storm. Sella threw up a barrier of destructive energy, shielding herself, but she was now effectively blind. Her senses overwhelmed by the swirling debris. Then, from above, a new sound. A roar that was not of the crowd. Sella looked up just in time to see a massive dragon, formed of swirling, high-pressure water, diving at her from out of the dust cloud. Water style. Water dragon jutsu. She had no time to prepare a full-power attack. She threw up her arms, meeting the water dragon with a hastily formed shield of raw energy. The dragon slammed into her barrier, exploding into a torrential downpour that soaked her to the bone and sent steam hissing into the air. The combination attack was over in seconds. But it had left the champion blind, disoriented, and fuming. The crowd was utterly bewildered. They had come to see a brawl, a contest of power. Instead, they were watching a strategic deconstruction. A clinic in battlefield control. Enough. Sella's voice was a reality-shaking scream of pure fury. She had had enough of the tricks, the dust, the clones. It was time to end this. She drew all of her power into herself, her body becoming a locus of unimaginable destructive force. "I will erase everything," she shrieked. She unleashed it all in a single, cataclysmic explosion. A dome of crimson-black energy erupted from her, expanding rapidly in all directions, disintegrating everything it touched. The sand, the remaining clones, the very air itself. The audience screamed, a mixture of terror and exhilaration. There was no dodging this. No tricks could save him now. This was absolute power. High in the royal box, Rias cried out his name. The dome of annihilation expanded to F.Il nearly a third of the arena before collapsing in on itself, leaving behind a massive, glassy crater, still glowing with residual heat. And in the center of it all, standing calmly on a patch of sand that had somehow remained untouched, was Naruto. He looked different. Dark orange pigmentation had appeared around his eyes, extending down his cheeks like war paint. His pupils, once round and blue, were now horizontal bars. Like those of a toad. He was radiating an entirely new kind of energy. It was calm, steady, and felt as ancient and powerful as the world itself. It was the energy of nature. And it had allowed him to sense the single, infinitesimally small flaw in Sella's all-out attack, the calm eye of the hurricane, and stand within it, completely unharmed. He had entered sage mode. Sella Bale stared, her jaw slack, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. He had taken her ultimate attack without a scratch. It was impossible. "My turn," Naruto said, his voice resonating with a new depth. And then he was gone. Not in a blur, not with a burst of speed. He simply vanished. One moment he was standing 50 yards away, the next he was right in front of her. Sella's combat instincts screamed, but her body couldn't react in time. She was too slow. Everything seemed to be moving in slow motion. Naruto didn't strike her. He shot past her, continuing his forward momentum. As he passed, he slammed the palm of his other hand into her back. In it, he held a swirling, spinning sphere of pure, concentrated chakra. It was a perfect, beautiful blue, and it screamed like a miniature typhoon. Rasengan. There was no grand explosion. The impact was intimate, brutal, and absolute. The vortex of chakra didn't detonate, it ground into her. It bypassed her passive energy shield as if it weren't there, tearing through her enchanted armor like wet paper and delivering its kinetic force directly into her body. Sella's eyes bulged. The air was driven from her lungs in a single, agonized gasp. She was launched forward like a cannonball, skipping off the sand once before slamming face first into the far arena wall with enough force to crack the foundations. She collapsed into a heap, her armor shattered, her body broken. Unconscious, Naruto landed lightly on his feet 100 feet away, the Rasengan gone from his hand. He stood up straight, the sage markings fading from his face. He took a single, steadying breath. Silence. The arena, which had been a sea of sound moments before, was now a vacuum. Hundreds of thousands of devils stared, their minds collectively short-circuiting. They had just witnessed a god being struck down. Their champion, their symbol of ultimate power, had been utterly and systematically dismantled. She hadn't just been beaten, she had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and in the final decisive clash, overwhelmingly outpowered. Then, a single sound broke the spell. Clap. High in the Mao's private box, Sears X Lucifer was on her feet. She was clapping, a slow, deliberate sound that echoed through the silent stadium. A wide, genuine smile of pure appreciation was on her face. Clap. clap, one by one, then in dozens, then in thousands. The rest of the crowd began to follow her lead. The hesitant applause grew, swelling into a thunderous, deafening ovation that shook the very stones of the arena. It was a sound of shock, of awe, and of undeniable respect. Naruto Uzumaki had won. In the aftermath, the political landscape of the underworld shifted on its axis. The envoys from heaven and the Grigori, who had been monitoring the broadcast, were dispatched before Sella's unconscious form had even been carried from the arena. The name Naruto Uzumaki was now on the lips of every powerful being in every faction. He was no longer a Grimoire secret. He was a global event. Back in the lavish guest wing of the Grimoire Palace, Naruto sat on the edge of a couch as Akeno dabbed a strange-smelling antiseptic on a few minor cuts he'd sustained from flying debris. The mood was electric. Rias was pacing back and forth, vibrating with a mixture of relief and triumphant excitement. Zenobia was staring at him, her former suspicion replaced by a look of profound, almost reverent respect. Kaneko was munching on a chocolate bar, but her eyes never left him. That was incredible, Rias finally said, stopping her pacing. They will be talking about that duel for 1,000 years. It was just a fight, Naruto said with a shrug, wincing as Akeno's cloth touched a scrape on his arm. No, it was not, Zenobia said, her voice firm. It was a statement. You faced the embodiment of power and proved that strategy and skill were superior. You humiliated the House of Baal and earned the respect of the Mao in a single afternoon. Akeno finished her work, her touch lingering on his arm for a moment longer than necessary. That final transformation, she said, her violet eyes alight with a deep, academic curiosity. That strange energy you used. It felt natural, pure. What was it? Quote. The others leaned in, their interest piqued. Naruto looked at their expectant faces. Rias had taken a huge risk for him. They had stood by him. They deserved a part of the truth. It's called Sage Mode, he explained. I draw in natural energy from the world itself, from the air, the ground, from life, and blend it with my own chakra. It dramatically increases my strength, speed, and sensory abilities. You use the planet's own life force as a weapon. Akeno murmured, her mind racing with the implications. It was a concept so alien to their magic system, which relied on manipulating internal or demonic energy. That's beautiful. She looked at him then, and for the first time, he saw past the flirtatious, slightly sadistic mask she always wore. He saw a deep, powerful intelligence and a hint of a shared loneliness. He saw the woman behind the devil. Thank you for your help, Akeno, he said, his voice genuine. My, so formal now, she purred. Her usual persona slipping back into place, but her smile reached her eyes this time. You can thank me properly later, Naruto-kun. He just shook his head with a small smile. The world he had fallen into was insane, filled with dangers he was only beginning to understand. He was a political pawn, a biological miracle, and a target for fanatics. But as he looked at the faces of the women around him, Rias, with her fiery determination, Zenobia, with her fierce loyalty, Kaneko, with her silent strength, and Akeno, with her hidden depths, he realized something. He wasn't entirely alone in it anymore. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. An Invitation from Heaven. The victory in the arena had bought Naruto freedom, but it had shattered his anonymity. He was no longer a Grimoire secret, he was the most famous person in 3 separate worlds. The days following the duel were a whirlwind of political fallout. Venelana Grimoire was in her element, masterfully leveraging Naruto's victory into political capital, deflecting demands from other houses with a grace and ruthlessness that Naruto had to respect. He was officially declared a protected guest of the underworld, a cleverly ambiguous title that gave him personal autonomy while keeping him firmly within the devil's sphere of influence. The invitations arrived like a flood. The first was from the Grigori, the fallen angel faction. Its governor, a woman named Azazel, sent a casual, handwritten note requesting a meeting to compare notes on fascinating, world-altering phenomena, which was a disturbingly cheerful way to phrase it. The second invitation was far more formal. It arrived in a flash of pure white light, delivered by a stoic, beautiful angel with 4 white wings. The scroll was sealed with the sigil of the seraphim. It was an official request from the Archangel Michael, leader of the heavenly host, for an audience in the celestial realm. The emergency meeting was held in Venelana's private solar. Rias, Akeno, Venelana, and Naruto sat around a polished obsidian table. "This is an unprecedented diplomatic situation," Venelana said, her long fingers steepled before her. "In the century since the Great Fade, no leader from one faction has willingly set foot in the capital of another. Our peace is a peace of non-interference, not of cooperation." "They aren't inviting a devil leader," Rias pointed out. "They're inviting him. And he is under our protection. Which makes him our responsibility," Venelana countered. "Heaven is not our territory, Rias. If they choose to act against him, we will have little recourse." "It could be a trap." "I don't think so," Naruto said, speaking for the first time. The others turned to him. "The devils of Met," he said, nodding towards Rias and her mother, "are all about politics, power, lineage. You see me as a key to your future. But angels, if they're anything like the stories, their concerns are different. More cosmic." Akeno smiled. "He has a point. Heaven worries about souls, prophecies, the grand design. A being like Naruto appearing from nowhere is something they cannot ignore. They won't see him as a breeding stock, they'll see him as an omen. An omen they may wish to control or eliminate." Venelana said grimly. "We have to go," Rias said with finality. "Refusing a direct invitation from Michael would be seen as an insult. It would suggest we are hiding him, that we have hostile intentions. We would lose all the political ground your victory gained for us," she said, looking at Naruto. "Akeno and I will accompany him. A small diplomatic escort." Venelana studied her daughter, then Naruto. She saw the logic, the necessity of the move. "Very well," she conceded. "But you will be on a knife's edge from the moment you arrive. Be vigilant. Trust no one." The gateway to heaven was not a magic circle of fire and runes, but a silent, shimmering portal of pure, golden light that opened in the Grimoire courtyard. Stepping through it was like plunging into a sea of liquid warmth. There was no disorienting lurch, only a gentle, peaceful transition. Naruto's first impression of heaven was one of overwhelming, sterile beauty. They stood in a vast, open plaza of gleaming white marble veined with gold. The architecture was breathtaking. Soaring alabaster towers that seemed to touch the radiant, sunless golden sky, connected by elegant bridges of solid light. Fountains of crystal clear water flowed without sound, and gardens of perfect, immaculate flowers bloomed in eternal spring. There was a gentle, celestial choir humming on the air, a constant, soothing melody. But it was empty. There were angels, yes. They walked the wide boulevards, their white wings folded neatly behind them. They spoke in hushed, polite tones. But there was no laughter. No children playing in the gardens. No loud, boisterous merchants in the plazas. The art on the walls depicted grand, epic scenes, but they were all of the past. There were no new sculptures, no modern paintings. Heaven felt less like a living city and more like a beautiful, perfect museum dedicated to a time that had long since passed. It was a place steeped in melancholy, a paradise holding its breath. Their angelic guide, a serene woman named Ariel, led them towards the central spire, the seat of the Archangel Michael. "It's so quiet," Naruto murmured to Akeno, who was walking beside him. He saw a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. Her fallen angel heritage made this place inherently hostile to her on a spiritual level, though she hid it well behind her placid smile. "It is a realm of order and contemplation, Naruto-kun. A bit different from the delightful chaos of the underworld." But he could feel what she wasn't saying. The order felt like stagnation. The contemplation felt like grief. It was a world that had lost its future and had retreated into the glories of its past. They were led into a circular chamber at the apex of the central spire. The walls were not walls at all, but open air, offering a panoramic view of the entire celestial city. In the center of the room, standing before a simple throne of white gold, was the Archangel Michael. She was not what Naruto had expected. She had the requisite long, golden hair and a dozen brilliant white wings that fanned out behind her, but her face was not one of serene, untouchable perfection. It was the face of a weary monarch, of a general who had seen too many wars. Kindness was in her deep blue eyes, but it was overshadowed by a profound, soul-deep sadness. "Lady Michael," Rias said, offering a respectful bow. Akeno did the same. Naruto simply gave a short, respectful nod. Rias Grimori, Akeno Himahima, and Naruto Uzumaki. Michael's voice was like the chiming of 1,000 tiny bells, yet it carried the weight of ages. Welcome to the Silver City. I thank you for coming. Her gaze settled on Naruto, and it was a look of intense, searching scrutiny. You have caused quite a stir. Wasn't my intention, Naruto said. The most significant events rarely are, Michael replied. She gestured for them to be at ease. I did not summon you here to engage in the political squabbles of the underworld. We have a far greater concern. The Great Fade. We were told it was a plague, Rias said cautiously. Michael's expression hardened. So it was believed. But our finest seers and mystics have studied the lingering traces of that event for the last century. It was no natural plague. The energy signature was complex, ancient, and undeniably divine. It was a targeted, worldwide ritual of extermination. An attack. The words hung in the air. Cold and heavy. An attack. Not a random tragedy, but a deliberate act of genocide. An attack by whom? Naruto asked, his mind racing. This changed everything. We do not know, Michael admitted. The words clearly tasting like failure in her mouth. The magic was of a nature we have never encountered. Primordial, feminine, utterly malevolent. We believed the enemy, whoever they were, had succeeded and vanished. But your arrival, a male from another reality, appearing from a rift of untraceable energy, it feels less like a coincidence and more like a response. A counter-move on a cosmic scale by a power we do not understand. I believe your presence here is a sign that the ancient enemy responsible for the Great Fade is beginning to stir once more. Before NY1 could process the horrifying implication, it happened. The celestial choir music abruptly cut out. A harsh, grating alarm klaxon blared through the city, a sound of pure panic that was utterly alien to the peace of heaven. Michael's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. Impossible, she whispered. The wards have been breached. Faster than Naruto could track, a dozen figures crashed through the open sides of the chamber. They were dressed in the pure white robes of angels, but their eyes burned with a cold, fanatical light, and the weapons in their hands, jagged, black daggers that seemed to suck the light out of the air, were anything but holy. For a pure world, they screamed, their voices distorted with rage. Death to the corruption, sterile crown, here, in the heart of heaven. They ignored Michael and the devils completely, their entire focus on a single target, Naruto. Rias and Akeno reacted instantly. Rias unleashed a torrent of destructive energy, vaporizing two of the fanatics before they could even land. Akeno called down a spear of holy lightning, impaling another. The royal guards of heaven, angels in shining silver armor, materialized in flashes of light, engaging the intruders. The chamber erupted into a chaotic melee of light, lightning, and steel. Naruto was already moving. He met the charge of the lead zealot, a woman with crazed eyes and a snarl on her face. He disarmed her with a single, precise chop to her wrist, the black dagger flying from her grasp. He spun, driving his elbow into the temple of another attacker, sending her crashing to the floor. These weren't like the devils he had fought. They were fanatics, driven by a singular, suicidal purpose. They fought with a reckless abandon that made them dangerous. We have to protect him. Michael commanded her guards, drawing a magnificent sword of pure, solidified light. She moved with a grace and power that was utterly terrifying, her dozen wings making her a blur of divine retribution. Naruto found himself back to back with Rias, fending off the coordinated attacks of three of the assassins. They have sympathizers in heaven. Rias shouted over the din of battle. It's the ONL. Why way they could have gotten past the wards. Less talking, more fighting. Naruto grunted, ducking under a wild swing of a black dagger. He saw an opening. One of the zealots had overextended, her flank exposed. He moved to strike, but from the corner of his eye, he saw another attacker lunging not at him, but at Asia, who had been brought along and was cowering behind a pillar. There was no time to think. He used a body flicker, appearing between the assassin and Asia just as the black dagger plunged forward. He couldn't fully evade. The jagged, obsidian blade sliced deep into his forearm. Pain was not a new sensation for Naruto. He'd been stabbed, burned, broken, and nearly killed more times than he could count. But this was different. This was not pain. This was wrong. An unnatural cold spread from the wound, a creeping, necrotic chill that felt ancient and utterly vile. It wasn't poison. It was something deeper, a spiritual venom that targeted his life force directly. Kurama roared within him, a blast of his potent, healing chakra rushing to the wound. The fox's power fought the encroaching corruption, but it couldn't instantly purge it. It was like trying to use a blowtorch to remove a stain of pure darkness. The zealot's eyes widened in shock. The cursed blade should have killed him, or at the very least, crippled him with necrotic poison. But he was still standing, his eyes blazing with fury. "What are you?" she hissed. Naruto didn't answer. He ripped the dagger from his own arm and, in the same motion, slammed its pommel into her forehead with enough force to shatter bone. She collapsed, unconscious. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun. Michael and her royal guards were brutally efficient. The last of the sterile crown fanatics was cut down. The dense silence in the chamber was deafening, broken only by the lingering hum of holy power and the distant, panicked cries from the city below. Michael rushed over to Naruto's side, her face a mask of cold fury and deep concern. "That weapon," she breathed, her eyes fixed on the ugly, black wound on his arm, which was sluggishly healing under the influence of Kurama's chakra. The flesh around it was tinged with a sickly purple. Naruto gritted his teeth against the lingering, alien cold. "Felt that before," he grunted, thinking. "No, not felt, sensed." He looked at Michael. "The energy. It's the same as what you described. From the great fade, ancient, divine, hateful." The realization hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. The sterile crown were not just political extremists. They were being armed, perhaps even guided, by the same ancient power that had wiped out all the males a century ago. Michael's face was ashen. Her worst fears were confirmed. The enemy was not stirring. They were already here. They had infiltrated her perfect, sterile city. Her sanctuary had been violated. "My apologies," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and shame. "I brought you into a viper's nest." She looked at the wound on his arm, at the dark, malevolent energy that still clung to him. She knew her own healing arts would be useless against it. She closed her eyes, reaching deep into the celestial archives of her mind, searching for a memory, a fragment, anything that could explain the horror they now faced. An image surfaced, a broken stone tablet, discovered in the deepest ruins of the Garden of Eden. A text that predated her father. She opened her eyes, and the weariness in them had been replaced by a chilling certainty. "There is a fragment," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A piece of a lost prophecy, from before the beginning. We never understood its meaning. Until now." She looked at Naruto, at the impossible man standing before her, bleeding from a wound inflicted by an ancient, forgotten goddess. It reads, "When the last atom walks the earth, the sealed mothers will hunger for their stolen loom, and the tapestry of creation will be unwound." Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Grigori Offensive. The journey from heaven was a tense, silent affair. They traveled not by a shimmering portal of light, but by a functional, almost crude teleportation circle that one of Michael's lieutenants activated with undisguised reluctance. The pristine white marble of heaven dissolved into a nauseating swirl of energy, and they were spat out onto a platform of cold, black iron. Naruto gritted his teeth, his hand clamped over the still healing wound on his forearm. Asia's magic in Kuo town had been miraculous, knitting flesh and bone with gentle warmth. Kurama's chakra was a raging inferno, a force of pure life that burned away any impurity. But this was different. The curse of the black dagger was a void. It wasn't a poison to be purged, it was a patch of nothingness that was actively trying to unmake him. Kurama was fighting a constant, draining battle not to heal the wound, but to stop it from spreading, pouring his own life force into the void just to keep it from consuming more. The stench of it, Naruto. The fox snarled within his mindscape, a rare note of genuine fury in his voice. "It's like the Jubi's hunger, but colder. Emptier. This is the energy of true death." "I know," Naruto sent back, his focus on the new, alien landscape before them. "Which is why we need answers." The Grigori was no palace. It was a fortress, a testament to function over form. They stood on a landing platform jutting out from a colossal, jagged mountain of black rock that floated in a sky of perpetual twilight, surrounded by a sea of roiling gray clouds. The entire mountain was honeycombed with structures, hangars, watchtowers, and laboratories, all built from the same dark, industrial metal. It looked less like the home of fallen angels and more like a weaponized research facility. A woman was waiting for them on the platform. She was tall and stunningly beautiful, with long black hair and a figure that could tempt a saint, but her attire was a practical lab coat thrown over a combat suit. She had a pair of sleek, black feathered wings folded behind her, and her sharp, intelligent eyes were alight with a startlingly intense curiosity. She wasn't looking at Rias, the famous Grimoire heiress. She was staring directly at Naruto's arm. "So, you're the anomaly," she said, her voice a mix of academic excitement and dry amusement. She strode forward, completely ignoring Rias and Akeno, and reached for Naruto's arm. "Fascinating. The energy signature is off the charts. It's not just necrotic, it's anti-entropic. A localized reality failure. May I?" Before Naruto could answer, she had his arm in a surprisingly strong grip, her fingers probing the edges of the cursed wound. "Azazel, governor of the Grigori," she introduced herself absently, as if her identity were a minor detail. "Don't mind me, Governor Azazel," Rias said, stepping forward, her tone frosty. "We are here on a matter of extreme urgency. Yes, the coming apocalypse, the return of the sealed mothers. A prophecy about the last Adam." Azazel waved a dismissive hand, her entire focus still on the wound. "I read Michael's report. Dreadfully dramatic. But the data, Rias, the data is the important thing. This curse, it isn't a spell. It's a concept. A piece of weaponized philosophy that says, this part of you no longer exists. How utterly terrifying. And brilliant. I have to get a sample." She produced a complex-looking syringe from her lab coat. Naruto instinctively pulled his arm back. "Whoa, hold on. Buy a guy dinner first." Azazel blinked, then let out a short, sharp laugh. "I like him. He's got humor. A rare commodity these days." Her gaze flickered to Akeno, and her expression softened for a fraction of a second. "Akeno Himahima, you have your mother's eyes." Akeno's serene smile didn't waver, but a flicker of emotion, surprise, pain, recognition, passed through her. "You knew my mother, Governor." "Shuri was one of my best researchers," Azazel said, her voice losing its manic energy and taking on a more somber tone. "A brilliant, kind woman. Her loss was a tragedy." The moment of connection passed, and she was back to business, turning her full attention to Naruto. "My apologies for the poor bedside manner. We're in a bit of a crisis, and you're currently the most interesting piece of data in the universe. Come with me. My lab is shielded. We can talk without half the supernatural world eavesdropping." She led them into the heart of the mountain. The interior was a maze of metallic corridors, bustling with fallen angels in lab coats and combat gear. It was a military base and a university campus rolled into one. Azazel's personal laboratory was a massive, cluttered cavern filled with chalkboards covered in arcane equations, holography. See projections of demonic and angelic DNA, and dozens of artifacts humming with contained power. "Right," she said, gesturing for Naruto to sit on a reinforced examination table. "Let's get to it. You, Uzumaki, are a biological impossibility. Your energy system is unlike anything I have ever seen. Not magic circuits, coils, a network that produces its own internal power source. And this, Kurama, you have sealed inside you. The energy readings are off the scale. It's like you have a miniature sun stuffed in your gut." She had already run a full diagnostic scan on him just from their walk down the corridor. Naruto was simultaneously impressed and deeply unsettled. "The prophecy Michael mentioned," Rias cut in, trying to steer the conversation back to the immediate threat. "The sealed mothers. Do you know what they are?" "A myth," Azazel said, tinkering with a complex scanner she aimed at Naruto's arm. "Or, we thought it was. A boogeyman story the old gods used to tell their children. Primer. Dial creation deities who believed reality was their exclusive property. According to the legend, they tried to seize control of creation from the newer pantheons, the biblical god, the Olympians, the Asgardians, all of them. They lost, and they were sealed away in a dimension of their own making by a coalition of every male god from every mythology. A final act of patriarchal panic, or so the story goes." "And the Great Fade?" Naruto asked. "If the legend is true, Azazel said, her face grim as she studied the readings on her scanner. It wasn't a plague. It was the seal. The coalition of male gods used their collective life force, and the life force of all their male descendants across all the realms, to power the lock on the mother's prison. The seal holds, but the price was everything. The room fell silent. The sheer, horrifying scale of it was almost too much to comprehend. An entire gender, sacrificed across countless worlds, to keep a handful of primordial goddesses locked away. Then my arrival, Naruto began, is upsetting the balance. Azazel finished for him. Your energy isn't tied to this reality's seal. You are an outside element. A key that could potentially turn the lock. The mothers want you to open the door. Michael wants you to reinforce it. And the devils, she said with a wry glance at Rias, want to use you to repopulate their nobility. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Everyone wants to use you, kid. Welcome to the cosmic chessboard. Deep within a hidden fortress of jagged rock and frozen shadows, Lyra Belial knelt. The air was cold enough to freeze blood. But she felt nothing. A new, dark fire burned within her. On her outstretched palm, a sigil of a coiled, headless serpent glowed with a malevolent, divine light, the mark of her new patron. Before her, a shimmering rift in reality showed a vague, feminine form made of shadow and starlight. The Grigori is a nest of tinkers and heretics, the voice of the mother goddess echoed in her mind. A sound of rustling graves and collapsing stars. They seek to understand what should be worshipped. They seek to quantify that which is absolute. This cannot be allowed. My forces are ready, Great Mother, Lyra said, her voice resonating with zealous fervor. We will purge the fallen and capture the male anomaly. You will not capture him, the goddess corrected, her voice laced with cold amusement. You will test him. You will force him to reveal the true depths of his power. The Grimoire girl coddles him. Michael would turn him into a relic. Only through conflict will he be honed into the key he is destined to be. Azazel's fortress is the perfect whetstone. The shadowy form leaned closer, a promise of power radiating from the rift. I have granted you a sliver of my might. Your followers are imbued with my righteous fury. Show this flawed world the strength of a pure creation. Go, and break him. The rift snapped shut. Lyra rose, her eyes glowing with borrowed divinity. The time for secret assassinations was over. The holy war had begun. The first alarm was a low, guttural klaxon that vibrated through the floor. Red lights began to flash in the corridors. Azazel cursed, dropping a delicate sensor. Unauthorized mass teleportation signatures. Multiple vectors. They're bypassing the outer defenses. Sterile crown. Rias breathed, her face hardening as she summoned her crimson demonic energy. On a scale I've never seen before, Azazel said, grabbing a massive, high-tech spear from a weapons rack. Everyone, to the central command deck. Now, they burst out of the lab into organized chaos. Fallen angels were taking to the air, energy rifles in hand. Automated defense turrets swiveled into position, their barrels glowing. Through the massive bay windows, they could see the sky. It was swarming. Hundreds of sterile crown fanatics were pouring out of a dozen massive teleportation circles, their white robes replaced with stark, black combat gear. They moved with a military precision the assassins in heaven had lacked, and their eyes glowed with the same faint, malevolent light as the cursed daggers. She empowered them, Naruto said. His eyes narrowed as he entered sage mode, the orange pigmentation flaring around his eyes. The mother goddess, she gave them her power. The battle for the Grigori had begun. It was not a skirmish, it was an invasion. Explosions rocked the fortress. Beams of holy and demonic energy crisscrossed the sky in a deadly lattice. Naruto, Rias, and Akino joined the fray on the main hangar deck, a vast CA. Vern that had become a primary breach point. Rias was a field commander, directing squads of fallen angels with a natural authority, her power of destruction obliterating enemy formations. Akino was a storm of righteous fury, her holy lightning arcing from her fingertips, a terrifyingly beautiful angel of death. Naruto was a phantom. He created 100 clones, sending them out to reinforce weak points in the defense. Rescue injured fallen, and relay tactical information. The real Naruto moved through the thickest parts of the fighting, a whirlwind of precise, disabling strikes. He was a one-man army. His efficiency and power turning the tide wherever he went. But for every zealot they struck down, 2 more seemed to take their place. They were stronger, faster, and more resilient than they had any right to be. Then, the roof of the hangar was torn open. Lyra Belial descended, hovering in the air like a dark goddess. She wielded a terrifying spear made of the same light-devouring black energy as the cursed daggers. And the divine sigil on her hand pulsed with sickening power. Azazel, she boomed, her voice amplified by magic. Your time of tinkering with flawed creations is over. Surrender the mail, and I will grant you a quick death. Tempting offer, Lyra, Azazel retorted, flying up to meet her, her own spear of light crackling with power. But I have a counter-offer. How about you stop being the mouthpiece for a fossilized cosmic horror and we go get a drink? The 2 leaders clashed in the center of the cavern, their battle a maelstrom of light and darkness that forced everyone else to fall back. The fighting raged, but Naruto could see they were losing. The sterile crown's numbers and divinely enhanced power were too much. He saw a blast tear through a section of the upper viewing galleries. It had been a diplomatic wing. A group of young devils, part of a cross-factional youth program Rias had told him about, were trapped, their guards overwhelmed by a squad of elite fanatics. One of the zealot commanders raised her sword, gathering a massive sphere of cursed energy, aiming it directly at the terrified, huddled children. There was no more time for holding back. No more time for just skill and tactics. Innocents were about to die. He closed his eyes. Kurama, all of it. Finally, the fox roared. Let's show these arrogant little gnats what true power looks like. An explosion of pure, golden energy erupted from Naruto, so bright and so powerful that it brought the entire battle to a standstill. Every single combatant, fallen, devil, and zealot alike, was blinded. Their senses overwhelmed by the sheer volcanic pressure of his chakra. The energy shot upwards, coalescing in the sky above the fortress. It took shape: a head, a torso, arms, 9 flowing tails. A colossal being of pure, incandescent golden light, larger than the mountain fortress itself, materialized over the battlefield. The Kurama avatar, in all its terrible, divine glory, had descended upon this world. Its massive, clawed hand, each finger the size of a battleship, moved with impossible speed. It swept down, not as a strike, but as a shield, its palm intercepting the sphere of cursed energy just before it could strike the children. The sphere, powerful enough to have vaporized half the hangar, dissipated harmlessly against the golden chakra, like a raindrop against a mountain. The battlefield was utterly silent, save for the low, humming thrum of the golden avatar. Lyra Belial, who had just forced Azazel to her knees, stared up, her face a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. Azazel stared up, her scientific mind completely stalled by the sheer scale of the phenomenon. Rias and Akino stared up, their hearts pounding with a mixture of terror and awe. From within the crystal at the avatar's forehead, Naruto focused on the small group of children he had just saved. He saw their faces, pale with terror. Then he saw the crest on the uniform of the girl in the lead, T. He swirling water emblem of the House of Citri, the Grimoire's greatest political rivals. He didn't care. They were just kids. His voice, amplified by the avatar, boomed across the silent battlefield, a sound that was not quite human. A fusion of his own will and the fox's ancient power. It was not a roar of aggression, but a calm, absolute statement of intent. You will not touch them. The young Citri heiress looked up at the golden giant that had saved her, at the being who was supposed to be a Grimoire prize, and her fear was washed away by a wave of pure, soul-shaking awe. In that moment, he was not a Grimoire, not an anomaly. Not a male, he was a protector, a hero, a god. The old lines had just been erased. The game had changed forever. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Mother's Tomb. The aftermath of the Grigori offensive was a strange and unsettling calm. The sterile crown, faced with the incandescent, mountain-sized reality of the Kurama avatar, had broken and fled. Lyra Belial, her Asa mask of incandescent fury and stunned disbelief, had vanished in a burst of dark energy, but not before giving Naruto a look that promised a future of relentless, fanatical hatred. The immediate threat was gone, but the implications of what had transpired were world-shaking. Naruto had not just won a battle, he had upended the entire chessboard. His display of power had been broadcast across the underworld's emergency channels. The image of the golden giant shielding the sea-tree heiress was now seared into the collective consciousness of their people. He had single-handedly saved the children of a dozen noble houses, many of whom had been politically hostile to the Grimoires. Overnight, old rivalries were rendered meaningless. He was no longer a Grimoire asset to be coveted or a political pawn to be captured. He was a strategic power in his own right, a kingmaker who had, with a single act of heroism, earned the unwavering gratitude and political debt of half the Devil Council. An emergency summit was called. But this time, the tone was vastly different. It was held via a network of magical communication circles, linking the leaders of the three factions from their respective headquarters. Seers X Lucifer, a deeply impressed Archangel Michael, and a visibly exhilarated Azazel formed a shaky, but unprecedented, unified front. "The evidence is undeniable," Azazel said, her voice crackling with energy from the Grigori Command Center, where repairs were already underway. "The Sterile Crown is a proxy army. They are being directly empowered by one or more of these sealed mothers. Their attack on the Grigori was not a raid, it was a test. They wanted to gauge Naruto-kun's upper limits. And in doing so, they have revealed their own hand," Michael's serene image added from heaven. "Their divine energy, however faint, is a thread we can follow. Our scryers have been tracking the residual signatures left by their teleportation circles. They all lead back to a single, previously uncharted nexus of deep, ancient power in the human world. A blind spot," Seers X Lucifer concluded from her throne in Lucifod, her crimson eyes thoughtful. "A place so old that it predates our own maps of the mortal plane. A place where the mother's influence is strongest. A place where their prison, their seal, is likely located." The unspoken conclusion hung in the air. Someone had to go. "This cannot be a factional mission," Seers X declared. "Any large-scale military presence could trigger a catastrophic response. We need a small, elite team. Versatile, powerful, and deniable if necessary." Her gaze, and the gazes of the other two leaders, all turned to the image of Naruto, who was participating in the meeting from a quiet room in the Grimoire Palace. "Looks like I'm up," Naruto said, his tone matter of fact. It wasn't a question. "You will not go alone," Rias's voice cut in as she stepped into the frame, placing a hand on his shoulder. "My peerage will accompany you." "Absolutely not," Seers X said instantly. "Rias, this is not a raiding game. The danger is a threat to our entire world," Rias interrupted her sister, her voice ringing with unshakable resolve. "My peerage has fought alongside Naruto. We understand his abilities. We have proven we can stand against the mother's forces. We are the most qualified to provide support." "She's right," Azazel chimed in with a grin. "Besides, I'm going too. There is no way in any of the hells that I am missing a chance to get my hands on pre-creation divine artifacts. The scientific value alone is worth the risk of being unmade from reality." After a brief, tense debate, a consensus was reached. The mission was sanctioned as a joint factional undertaking. The team would be small: Naruto, Rias, Akeno, and Xenovia, representing a blend of shinobi arts and devil magic. Azazel would accompany them as a specialist and representative of the fallen angels. Heaven, reluctant to send any of its AON into such a spiritually corrupt location, would provide logistical support and run interference in the mortal world, ensuring their investigation remained secret. Their destination was a desolate, windswept desert in a remote corner of Egypt. There was nothing there, no pyramids, no ruins, just endless waves of sand under a merciless sun. Heaven's intelligence had led them to a specific set of coordinates where the background radiation of ancient, divine magic was thick enough to taste. "The entrance is supposed to be here," Azazel said, consulting a complex scanner that was whirring unhappily. "The energy is off the charts. But it's completely non-Euclidean. It's like a door that's simultaneously in a dozen different dimensions. We can't just walk through it." Naruto closed his eyes, extending his own senses. He ignored the chaotic magical signatures Azazel was tracking. He searched for something else. He entered sage mode, letting the natural energy of the world flow into him. The desert was not empty. It was teeming with life, but it was old, slow life. The life of rocks, of the wind, of the deep, slumbering earth. And beneath it all, He felt it. A gaping, silent scream. A wound in the world's life force. A place where natural energy went to die. There, he said, pointing to a seemingly random spot on the flat desert floor. It's not a door you open with magic. It's a seal you have to be keyed to. He walked to the spot and placed his palm flat on the sand. The mothers are goddesses of creation. Feminine energy. The seal was powered by male energy. Polar opposites. He channeled a small, controlled thread of his own chakra into the ground. It was not demonic, not holy, not natural. It was uniquely his, the energy of a being from another reality. An outside element. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the sand at his feet began to glow with a soft, golden light. Intricate runes, unlike any Azazel or Rias had ever seen, spread out from his hand, forming a massive circle 100 feet in diameter. The ground trembled, and with a low groan, the entire circle of sand and rock descended into the earth like a massive platform, revealing a grand, spiraling street. Aircase leading down into absolute darkness. Well, I'll be damned, Azazel breathed, her eyes wide with scientific glee. A bioenergetic lock. Kid, you are full of surprises. Let's go, Rias said, her hand glowing with a small orb of crimson light to illuminate the way. And stay sharp, we're in their house now. They descended into the cold, silent dark. The air grew heavy, thick with the GHT of eons and a palpable sense of sleeping malevolence. This was a place that had not known light or life for millennia. The staircase opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. The walls were not carved. They seemed to have been woven from some kind of solidified shadow, and they were covered in bas-relief carvings that writhed and shifted when you weren't looking directly at them. The carvings told a story. The story of the mothers. They saw them in their primordial glory, weaving galaxies from looms of starlight. They saw them creating the first life forms, monstrous, chaotic beings of pure potential. Then they saw the arrival of the new gods, Odin, Zeus, Yahweh, depicted as rigid, angular figures who brought concepts like order and law to the mothers, beautiful chaos. They saw the war. It was a conflict on a scale that dwarfed the great war between the devils, angels, and fallen. It was a war of concepts, of creation versus order. The mothers and their chaotic spawn against the unified pantheons of the new world. This isn't a tomb, Zenobia whispered, her hand resting on Durandal's hilt, the holy sword's aura a small, defiant flicker in the oppressive darkness. It's a history book. Their history book. As they moved deeper, the passive defenses of the tomb began to awaken. The carvings on the walls began to peel away, forming shadowy, semi-real creatures that swiped at them with claws of solidified despair. They were not strong, but they were relentless. Zenovia's Durandal passed right through them, its holy power having little effect. Rias's destructive magic could disperse them. But they would simply reform a moment later. They're not truly alive, Azazel observed, dodging a spectral talon while running a scan. They're psychic echoes, memories given form. We can't fight them with raw power. Then we use something they won't expect, Naruto said. He flashed through a series of hand signs. Fire style. Grand fireball jutsu. He inhaled and spewed a massive globe of pure, elemental fire that illuminated the entire chamber, incinerating the shadow creatures in a flash of brilliant light. They did not reform. Elemental energy, Akeno realized. It's a form of creation they don't recognize. Their magic is based on divinity and life force. This is cruder, more fundamental. It unravels them. It was a revelation. This mission wasn't just a battle, it was a training exercise. Naruto began to actively coach them, showing Rias how to shape her destructive energy into more focused, elemental forms, a spear of pure heat, a concussive blast of raw force. He worked with Akeno, teaching her to separate the holy and demonic aspects of her lightning, allowing her to wield pure electricity, a raw force of nature. The shared danger, the reliance on each other's skills, began to forge them into something more than a leader and her servants. Akeno, seeing Naruto use a wind-style jutsu to dissipate a cloud of psychic poison, was inspired. She began to experiment, weaving the wind with her lightning, creating a small, controlled thunderstorm in the palm of her hand. Like this? She asked, a genuine, excited smile on her face, free of her usual flirtatious mask. Perfect. Naruto praised her, and the look of pride she gave him in return was worth more than any victory. They pushed deeper, their teamwork becoming a seamless, deadly dance. They ed through chambers depicting the mother's defeat, their binding, and the creation of the Great Seal. The oppressive psychic energy of the tomb began to prey on them, not with monsters but with illusions. Zenobia suddenly found herself back in the halls of the Vatican, being branded a heretic by the women who had raised her. Rias saw her family, her entire house, crumbling to dust, her failure as a leader absolute. Akeno was confronted by the image of her human mother, dying, blaming Akeno for the fallen angel blood that had brought assassins to their door. Each was trapped in their own personal hell. But then, a voice cut through the illusions. A calm, steady anchor in the sea of despair. "It's not real," Naruto's voice said in their minds. He was standing in the center of the chamber, his eyes closed in concentration. A golden aura of sage chakra radiating from him. He wasn't immune to the illusions, but his will, forged in the fires of war and loss, was unshakable. He had faced his own demons long ago. They're feeding on your fear. Your regret. Let it go. It's the past. We're fighting for the future. Right here, right now. His voice, his emotional clarity, was a lifeline. One by one, they broke free from their nightmares, their resolve hardened, their trust in him absolute. They were no longer just allies. They were partners. Finally, they reached the heart of the tomb. It was a vast, spherical chamber. In the center, suspended in the air by chains of shimmering, dark energy, was a colossal, pulsating sphere of pure blackness. It was a hole in reality, a wound in space-time. And it radiated a cold so profound it seemed to steal the warmth from their very souls. "The seal," Azazel whispered, her scanner screaming with impossible readings. The dark chains that held it were connected to countless points on the walls of the chamber. And at each connection point was a soul. A faint, masculine spirit, trapped in an eternal, tormented slumber. Millions of them. Billions. They were the souls of every male who had perished in the Great Fade. "My God," Rias breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's a prison, powered by a genocide." As they stared in horror, they made one final, terrifying discovery. The seal itself was weakening. The chains of soul energy were flickering, and hairline cracks of purple, cosmic light were beginning to form on the surface of the black sphere. "The seal is failing," Azazel said, her voice grim. "The mother's power is growing. They're starting to break out on their own." She pointed her scanner at Naruto. "The readings were off the charts. And your energy, your unique dimensional frequency, it's resonating with the seal. It's acting like a tuning fork." She looked at him, her face pale. "Naruto, your power is the only thing in existence that can interface with this seal. You can either use your life force to reinforce it, patching the cracks and locking them away for another few millennia." She paused, her expression turning to one of utter dread. "Or," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "you could use it to resonate with the seal's core frequency, shattering it completely." Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Price of a Future. The revelation in the heart of the tomb settled over them like a shroud. The pulsating black sphere of the seal seemed to mock them, a monument to 1,000,000,000 stolen lives, and Naruto was the only one who held the key. The choice was stark, biblical in its simplicity: be the jailer or the unwilling harbinger of apocalypse. Reinforce the seal and condemn this world to a slow, certain extinction. Buying a few more centuries of quiet desperation. Or shatter it, unleash the primordial goddesses, and face them in a war that reality itself might not survive. The journey back from the desert was a heavy, silent one. The camaraderie forged in the tomb's depths was replaced by a shared, unspoken dread. They now carried the weight of the world's fate, and the burden was crushing. News of their discovery sent shockwaves through the leadership of the three factions. The shaky alliance, born of a common threat, was now facing its first true test. An emergency council of the Mao was convened in Lucifod. Michael and her seraphim went into deep, prayerful seclusion in heaven. Azazel locked herself in her lab, working feverishly, trying to find a third option, a scientific loophole in a problem of cosmic divinity. And finding none, the world held its breath, and Naruto Uzumaki was at the center of the storm. He retreated to the same garden courtyard where he had first sparred with Rias's peerage. He needed to think, to disconnect from the frantic political maneuvering and the weight of a billion expectant eyes. He sat by the small koi pond, watching the fish swim in their blissfully ignorant circles. He was a decider of fates again, a role he had never wanted. He thought of Jiraiya, of Nagato, of Obito, men who had tried to change the world through their own power and ideals. And the trail of blood and misery they had left in their wake. Was he any different? He was so lost in thought that he didn't hear her approach. Rhea stood a few feet behind him, not as a king or a devil noble, but just as a woman. Her posture betraying the immense strain she was under. The council is at an impasse, she said quietly. Half the houses demand you reinforce the seal. They are terrified. They would rather our people fade away over centuries than face the mothers in open war. The other half, they argue that a slow death is no better than a quick one. They see this as our only chance, however slim, to fight for a real future. She let out a humorless laugh. They speak of it as if it's your duty, your responsibility. They've forgotten you don't even belong to this world. Doesn't matter where I'm from. Naruto said, his gaze still on the water. I'm here now. The choice is on my shoulders. I can't change that. What are you going to do? She asked, the question raw and vulnerable. What do you think I should do? He countered, finally turning to look at her. Rias met his gaze, and in her crimson eyes, he saw the war raging within her. The leader versus the woman. The pragmatist versus the dreamer. The head of House Grimori, she said, her voice formal and strained, would advise you to reinforce the seal. It is the logical, prudent choice. It preserves the status quo. It protects our people from a war we would almost certainly lose. It buys us time. And Rias, he pressed gently. What does Rias say? Her composure broke. The mask of the noble heiress crumbled, revealing the terrified, hopeful young woman beneath. Rias says that a gilded cage is still a cage, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. She says she is tired of a world without laughter, a future without hope. She says that she has seen you perform miracles. And she believes in you. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a plea. But it's not fair. It's too much to ask of one person. Before he could respond, the mothers made their move. They could not break the seal themselves, not yet. But the cracks were wide enough for their influence to seep out. Not as a physical force, but as a psychic one. A wave of divine, seductive whispers that washed over the entire planet. To the power-hungry, they promised dominion. To the barren, they promised fertility. To the fearful, they promised security. To the devout, they promised a return to a purer, more natural order. It was a poison tailored to the secret desires of every heart. And the world began to fracture. In the underworld, Duchess Vapula, the same noblewoman who had called for Naruto's execution, openly declared her allegiance to the mothers, forming a new political party, the Natural Order. Dozens of minor houses, tired of the dominance of the old guard, flocked to her banner. The sterile crown, once a fringe element, saw its ranks swell with new converts, their message of purity now backed by the promise of divine power. A global civil war, a holy war, began to smolder. In heaven, a sect of angels who had grown weary of their static, melancholic existence began preaching the mother's gospel, claiming they were the original, true creators and that the biblical God was a usurper. Schisms formed, and for the first time in millennia, the sound of angelic steel clashing against itself echoed through the Silver City. The world was tearing itself apart. The choice was no longer abstract. Naruto could feel the planet's life force groaning under the strain, the growing chaos and bloodshed, a festering wound in the natural energy he was so attuned to. Reinforcing the seal now wouldn't just be condemning them to a slow extinction, it would be locking them in a prison while they slaughtered each other. The debate was over. The time for choosing had passed. The enemy had forced his hand. That evening, he found Rias, Akeno, Zenobia, and Kaneko in the palace war room. They were looking at a magical map of the underworld, dotted with dozens of flashing red sigils indicating skirmishes and outright battles. The civil war was escalating. They're not giving us a choice, Zenobia said, her voice grim. Her hand gripping Durandal's hilt. They're trying to soften us up, weaken us from the inside before they even break free. It's a sound strategy, Akeno added, her expression darker than Naruto had ever seen it. Why face a unified army when you can have them bleed each other dry first? Naruto walked to the head of the table. He placed his hands flat on the map, and the red sigils flickered. Then we don't play their game, he said, his voice ringing with a calm, absolute authority that made them all look up. We write our own. He looked at each of them in turn, not as a commander to his subordinates, but as a partner to his equals. I'm not going to reinforce the seal. I won't be the jailer for a world that's turned itself into a torture chamber. And I'm not going to stand by while your people tear each other apart. He took a deep breath. I'm going to break the seal. I'm going to let the mothers out. And we are going to face them. All of us, together. It was a declaration of war against gods. It was insane. It was suicidal. And in that moment, it was the only path that made sense. Rhea stepped toward him, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering light. She reached out and took his hand. You won't be doing it alone. Akeno came to his other side, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Her smile was back, but it was different now. It was a warrior's smile. Sharp and dangerous. Era, she purred. A fight against the creators of the universe. It sounds wonderfully thrilling. Xenovia drove the tip of Durandal into the floor, a ringing declaration of intent. My sword is sworn to protect humanity and those who stand with it. You are one of those. I stand with you. Kaneko simply walked up and stood beside him, punching her fist into her palm with a dull thud. Her message was clear. They were no longer just his allies or his friends. In that moment of shared, insane purpose, they were his peerage. Not by a devil's contract, but by a bond forged in battle and trust. What you're proposing is madness, a voice said from the doorway. Venelana Grimori stood there, flanked by Sirzex and Azazel. You would intentionally unleash the very beings who are destroying us. We would choose the battlefield, Naruto corrected her. We would face them on our terms, not wait for them to break free when we are at our weakest. We would meet them with a unified army, not a fractured, bleeding one. And what makes you think you can create a unified army? Sirzex challenged, though there was a glint of something like hope in her eyes. My people are killing each other in the streets. Because I'm going to give them something to fight for, Naruto said. Not a house, not a faction, not a political ideal. A future, a real one. He stood on the grand balcony of the Grimori Palace, overlooking a courtyard that was now filled not just with Grimori soldiers, but with the hastily assembled loyalist armies of all three factions. Devils stood shoulder to shoulder with fallen angels. Grimori soldiers stood beside Cetri guards. Even a contingent of Heaven's Royal Guard, sent by Michael as a show of faith, stood among them. They were a patchwork army, united only by their desperation and their fear. Naruto's voice, amplified by magic, carried over them all. I know what you are feeling, he began, his voice clear and steady. You are afraid. You see your world cracking apart. You see your friends and families choosing sides in a war you don't understand. The enemy has whispered promises in your ears, preying on your fears and your desires. They offer you power. They offer you a return to a past that never was. They offer you lies. He roared, and the word seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. Their purity is a world of silent slaves. Their order is the peace of the grave. They are the architects of your suffering, the beings who built your prison and now offer you a more comfortable cell. He pointed towards the horizon, towards the direction of the hidden tomb. I have a choice. I can use my power to reinforce that prison. I can lock you all back in here, to continue this slow death, this civil war. For another 1,000 years, I can buy you peace. But it will be the peace of a graveyard. I refuse. His voice was a raw, powerful cry of defiance. I will not be your jailer. I have in a future where you are not just survivors, but creators. I believe in a world where you decide your own fate. The enemy wants you to fight each other. I am asking you to fight with me. For your children. For your future. For a world free of ancient gods and their cosmic games. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. He had their attention. He had their hearts. I am going to that tomb, he declared. His voice dropping to a low, intense promise. I am going to shatter that seal. And I am going to drag those self-proclaimed goddesses out into the light. And when I do, I will need an army at my back. Will you be that army? For a heartbeat, There was silence. Then, a single sword was raised. It was Zenobia. Then Rias's hand flared with crimson power. Akino's lightning crackled, one by one, then in a roaring wave. Thousands of weapons were raised to the purple sky. A cheer erupted, a single, unified sound of desperate, defiant hope from the throats of devils, angels, and fallen alike. They were no longer a patchwork of factions. They were an army, and they had their leader. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. War of the First Mothers. The Egyptian desert was no longer silent. The combined loyalist army of the three factions stood arrayed behind Naruto, a sea of devilish crimson, angelic white, and the dark, pragmatic steel of the fallen. The air was electric with a tension so thick it felt like a physical pressure. Thousands of warriors, once enemies, now stood as one, their gazes fixed on the man who had become their singular, impossible hope. Naruto stood before the spiraling staircase that led down into the tomb. Rias was at his right, her crimson aura a steady, burning flame. Akino was at his left, arcs of lightning dancing playfully over her knuckles, her smile a razor's edge. Zenobia and Kaneko stood just behind them, a silent promise of steel and strength. Azazel was a short distance away, frantically deploying a series of scanners and reality anchors, her face a mask of manic, scientific glee. This was the apocalypse, and she had a front row seat. Once this starts, there's no going back, Naruto said, his voice quiet, meant only for his inner circle. They will throw everything they have at us. And we will throw it back, Rias replied, her hand resting on his arm for a brief, reassuring moment. We stand with you, Naruto. To the end. He gave a slight nod. Then turned to face the entrance. He didn't need to descend into the tomb again. He could feel the seal from here, a cancer deep in the planet's life force. He closed his eyes, entered sage mode in an instant, and drew upon the natural energy of the world. But this time, he didn't just borrow it. He gathered it, shaped it, and focused it all on a single, conceptual point, the lock. He slammed his palm onto the sand. Release, he roared. There was no explosion. Instead, a wave of pure, golden energy shot down into the earth. For a moment, there was an absolute, profound silence. Then, a low, keening sound rose from the depths, the sound of a billion tormented souls sighing in unison. A pillar of ethereal, silver light erupted from the tomb's entrance, shooting miles into the sky. It was not a violent blast, but a gentle, beautiful exodus. The souls of the male race, imprisoned for a century to power a cosmic lock, were finally free. They faded into the sky, a final, silent farewell that washed over the assembled armies with a feeling of deep, transcendent sadness and profound gratitude. The moment of peace was shattered. The ground began to tremble violently. The pillar of silver light was consumed by a column of roiling, absolute darkness that clawed its way out of the tomb. The sky itself seemed to bleed, the sun blotted out, the perpetual twilight of the underworld. LD and the golden glow of heaven simultaneously visible in a fractured, terrifying panorama. Reality was fraying at the seams. From the column of darkness, 5 figures emerged. They were not women, not in any mortal sense. They were concepts given flesh. One was carved from living stone and earth, her eyes chips of obsidian. Another was a being of pure shadow and void, her form constantly shifting and indistinct. A third was a grotesque creature of raw flesh and pulsing veins, her breath a cloud of pestilence. The fourth was a whirlwind of storm clouds and lightning, her laughter the crack of thunder. The fifth was a being of magma and volcanic rage, her hair a cascade of fire. The 5 sealed mothers had returned. And they were not alone. Floating before them were their chosen champions. Sela Bale, her body no longer just powerful but twisted, her skin etched with glowing, corrupt runes, her eyes burning with the cold light of a dead star. And beside her, Lyra Belial, who now looked more divine than devilish. Her black combat suit replaced by flowing robes of shadow, her spear a thing of pure, solidified divine hatred. So, the voice of the Stone Mother echoed, not in their ears, but directly in their minds. A sound of grinding continence. The little anomaly has chosen to be the key that shatters the door. A foolish, final choice. Behind them, the darkness congealed, spitting out an army of horrors. Twisted mockeries of life, creatures of nightmare and psychic despair, poured forth to meet the loyalist army. Rias turned to the army, her own voice magically amplified, cutting through the rising tide of fear. You wanted a future. There it is. Go and take it. With a single, unified roar that shook the desert, the two armies crashed together. The war for the fate of reality had begun. The battlefield was a maelstrom of chaos. Devil magic clashed with divine horrors. Angelic spears of light impaled creatures of shadow. Fallen angel energy rifles fired alongside holy swords. It was a beautiful, terrible symphony of desperation and hope. Azazel zipped through the sky, her analytical mind in overdrive as she blasted apart eldritch abominations. Their energy patterns are fascinating. They violate at least 3 known laws of thermodynamics. She yelled to no one in particular. Rias took her position on a floating command platform, a true king directing her forces. 3rd and 4th Battalions, concentrate fire on the left flank. Their flesh golems have no resistance to concussive force. Knights, form a spearhead with the Grigori vanguard. Break their center. She was a master strategist. Her mind a cold, clear map of the swirling chaos below. Naruto knew he couldn't get bogged down in the main battle. The true threat was the leadership. Akeno, Zenobia, Sella is yours, he commanded. The rest of you, hold the line. Lyra is mine. He shot forward, a golden blur of Sage Mode chakra, heading directly for the extremist leader. Lyra met his charge, our spear of darkness clashing with the chakra-coated kunai in his hand. The impact sent a shockwave that flattened the dunes for a mile in every direction. You have doomed us all, anomaly. Lyra screamed, her voice filled with righteous fury. I would have given us a pure, clean world, free of the weakness and filth you represent. You call a world without love, without family, without a future, pure. Naruto shot back, parrying a thrust aimed at his heart. I call it a prison. I'm here to tear down the walls. Their duel was a clash of ideologies given physical form. Lyra's divine power was cold, empty. An energy that unmade things. Naruto's Sage Mode was the opposite, a vibrant, teeming energy of life itself. They were a perfect antithesis to one another. Meanwhile, Akeno and Zenobia confronted the corrupted Sella Bale. The former champion was a monster of raw power, her every punch shattering the ground. Her destructive energy now tinged with the same cursed, anti-life magic as the daggers in heaven. I will have my revenge on the Grimoire whore's pet. Sella roared, launching a massive blast of chaotic energy at them. Zenobia met it head-on, Durandal blazing with holy light. Your grudge is with him. But you'll have to get through us. The force of the blast sent her skidding back, her arms trembling with the strain. Akeno rose into the air, a storm gathering around her. Era, Sella-chan. Has no one ever told you it's rude to hold a grudge? She unleashed a torrent of holy lightning, but Sella merely swatted it aside, the divine energy a part of her now, no longer a weakness. They were being overpowered. Sella was simply too strong, too durable. As she backhanded Zenobia, sending the knight flying, Akeno knew their current tactics weren't working. She looked across the battlefield, saw Rias commanding armies, saw Naruto fighting a goddess-infused zealot for the fate of the world. They were all pushing past their limits, embracing who they were. It was time she did the same. She closed her eyes. For her entire life, she had been torn. The daughter of a human priestess and a fallen angel cadre. The gentle soul of her mother versus the dark power of her father. She had always kept them separate. The holy lightning of her angelic side, the raw demonic power she'd gained as one of Rias's peerage. No more. I am the daughter of Shuri Himahima, she whispered to herself. And I am the daughter of Barakil. Her power erupted. Her single pair of black, fallen angel wings burst forth, followed by a pair of leathery, devil wings. Holy golden lightning began to crackle around her right hand, while demonic black lightning crackled around her left. She brought her hands together, and the two opposing energies did not cancel each other out. They merged. They twisted into a horrifyingly beautiful, unstable vortex of golden black energy, a perfect union of light and darkness. Holy demonic lightning dragon, she screamed, unleashing a massive, roaring dragon made of pure, paradoxical energy. Sella's eyes widened in shock as the attack slammed into her. The contradictory forces tore at her on a fundamental level, the holy energy burning her demonic side. The demonic energy corrupting her divine enhancements. She shrieked as her corrupted form was immolated, her power finally overwhelmed. Across the battlefield, Rias saw Akino's transformation with a surge of pride. But her attention was snapped back to the larger conflict. The five mothers were beginning to move, their combined aura pressing down on the loyalist army, causing even veteran warriors to fall to their knees in terror. Naruto was locked in his duel with Lyra, unable to intervene. The goddesses focused their power, a combined beam of 5 different kinds of divine, world-breaking energy, and fired it directly at Naruto's back. Rias didn't hesitate. She poured every ounce of her demonic energy, her very life force, into a single, desperate act. Aegis of the Crimson King. A massive, multi-layered shield of the Grimoire crest appeared behind Naruto. The goddesses' beam slammed into it. The shield cracked, shattered, and then reformed, Rias feeding her own life into it to keep it from breaking. Blood trickled from her nose and ears. The strain was immense, but she held. The shield held. Naruto felt the surge of power behind him, felt Rias's desperate, selfless act. It was all the motivation he needed. "You are finished, Lyra," he roared. He formed a Rasenshuriken in his hand, but this one was different. It was a golden orb of pure sage chakra, infused with the boiling, incandescent power of Kurama. A tailed beast bomb Rasenshuriken. He threw it. Lyra, her face a mask of disbelief, was completely consumed by the attack. Her borrowed divine power was stripped away, her body vaporized by the sheer, overwhelming power of life and rage. The battlefield fell silent for a single, stunned moment. Their champion was defeated. The five mothers looked at Lyra's fading dust, then at the exhausted but victorious Naruto, then at the weakened Rias. The flesh mother let out a wet, gurgling laugh. The champion has fallen. The vessel is broken. But the power can be reclaimed. He is stronger than we anticipated, the Storm Mother thundered. Our individual forms are insufficient. Then we shall no longer be individual, the Shadow Mother hissed. The five goddesses turned towards each other. They raised their arms, and a terrifying, sacrificial ritual began. They began to dissolve, their distinct forms of stone, shadow, flesh, storm, and fire breaking down and flowing towards a central point. They were screaming, a chorus of 5 divine voices shrieking in agony and ecstasy as they unmade themselves. "What are they doing?" Zenobia panted, stumbling over to the group. "Something awful," Azazel said, her scanners going haywire before exploding in a shower of sparks. They're merging, combining their divine essences. A monstrous new form began to take shape in the center of their ritual. It was a being of impossible geometry, with limbs of stone, a torso of flesh, a head of pure shadow wreathed in a crown of fire and lightning. It was a Singu, Lar entity that radiated the power of all 5, magnified 100-fold. As it took its final, terrifying shape, the very fabric of reality around it began to buckle and fray. Colors bled from the landscape. The sound of the wind died. The laws of physics were screaming in protest. The loyalist army, which had been cheering moments before, was now frozen in absolute, primordial terror. The battle against the Mother's army was won. But the entity that now floated before them was not a goddess. It was something more, something older, the primordial Mother, and its first act was to gaze upon the world it had helped create and find it wanting. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. A New Genesis. The silence on the battlefield was more terrifying than any war cry. It was the silence of a world holding its breath before being erased. The primordial Mother, a fusion of 5 creator goddesses, floated where the chaotic ritual had ended, an impossible creature of living concepts. It did not radiate power in the way a devil or an angel did. It simply was power. The color was draining from the landscape, the vibrant reds and golds of the battle fading into a dull, lifeless gray. The sound of the wind died. The very laws of physics felt thin, like a thread about to snap. Before this being, the combined army of the 3 factions was less than nothing. Hope, which had burned so brightly just moments before, was extinguished. Replaced by a cold, primordial dread that sank into the marrow of their bones. This is a being on the level of the biblical God, Azazel whispered, her scientific mind, which had reveled in the chaos, now paralyzed by a force that defied all known principles of reality. No, beyond. It's not wielding power. It is the foundation. This is not a god, Naruto, Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind. And for the first time since Naruto had known him, the ancient Biju sounded truly unnerved. This is a cancer on reality. A self-correcting error that believes creation is the mistake. The primordial mother raised a hand made of crackling lightning and solidified shadow. It did not prepare an attack. It simply gestured, and a section of the loyalist army, a dozen devil PLA tunes and a score of fallen angel shock troopers, simply vanished. There was no light, no explosion, no screams. One moment they were there, the next, the space they occupied was empty, as if they had never existed at all. Panic, stark and absolute, shattered the army's fragile unity. They broke. They ran. Hold the line. Sears X Lucifer roared from her command post, unleashing a wave of her power of destruction, not at the enemy, but as a wall to halt her retreating troops. Cowardice will not save you from this. She turned her attention to the primordial mother, her face a mask of grim determination. She gathered her power, a sphere of energy so concentrated it looked like a black hole, an attack that could unmake a small country. She fired it, at the same time, a spear of pure, solidified holy light. The conceptual wrath of heaven itself, descended from the sky, launched by the Archangel Michael, who was monitoring and supporting them from her realm. The two ultimate attacks of He underworld and heaven struck the primordial mother simultaneously. And nothing happened. The entity did not shield itself. It did not counter. The attacks simply washed over it, their reality breaking force unraveling and dissipating as they touched its skin. It was like trying to burn the ocean. The primordial mother tilted its shadowy head, a gesture of almost bored curiosity, as if acknowledging a fly that had landed on it. Naruto knew. Brute force was useless. This was not a battle that could be won by hitting harder. He unleashed the full power of the Kurama avatar one more time. The golden giant roared, its 9 tails lashing, and charged. It was the embodiment of life and will, a direct contradiction to the cold, empty finality of the mother. The avatar's fist, large enough to shatter mountains, slammed into the entity's chest. For a moment, there was resistance. Golden light warred against the formless void. But then the avatar's fist began to dissolve, the chakra construct unmaking itself upon contact. Naruto gritted his teeth, pouring more and more power into it, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands. The avatar flickered and died, the golden light dissolving into nothing, leaving him standing alone and panting on the gray sand. He had lost. They had all lost. As the primordial mother began to raise its hand again, preparing to erase another piece of their world, Naruto's sage senses, desperately searching for a weakness, a flaw, a single loose thread, found something. It wasn't in the enemy. It was in the world around him. A faint, silvery sheen that still hung in the air. An echo. The collected life force of the billion souls he had just freed from the seal. It hadn't fully dissipated yet. It was a vast, untapped ocean of potential energy. An energy that was the conceptual opposite of the goddesses. And in a flash of desperate, suicidal inspiration, he saw the path. Not to victory, but to survival. It was not a weapon to be fired. It was a lock to be forged. The seal had been powered by that male life force. The goddesses were the ultimate expression of the feminine divine. His own energy, from another reality, was the key that could interact with both. He couldn't destroy the mother. But maybe, just maybe, he could imprison her again. Not in a tomb powered by death, but in a conceptual prison forged from the very life she had tried to extinguish. But the price, to channel that much soul energy, that much raw, conceptual power, through his mortal body. It would shred him from the inside out. It would burn his very soul to ash. It was a one-way trip. He made his choice. He reached out through the mental link he shared with his closest companions. Kurama, I'm going to need everything you have. Not for a fight, for a seal. Naruto, no, the fox roared. That much energy it will destroy you. There will be nothing left to regenerate. There's no other way, Naruto sent back, his resolve like steel. He then broadcasted his intentions to the others. Rias, Akano, everyone, get the army clear. I have a plan, but you can't be here for it. What are you talking about? Rias's frantic voice shot back in his mind. We don't retreat. We don't leave you. It's not a retreat, he explained, the words calm and final. It's a sealing jutsu. I'm going to use the released soul energy to create a new prison. But the backlash, it will wipe this entire desert off the map. He was lying. The jutsu would have no backlash. The destruction would be entirely internal. But it was the only way to make them leave. But they knew him too well. You're lying. Akino's voice was a tight, strained whisper in his head. The destruction won't be external, will it, Naruto-kun? You're planning to burn yourself out. To make yourself the sacrifice. He didn't answer. The silence was his confession. No. Rias's mental scream was one of pure, raw anguish. She flew to his side, her face pale, her eyes blazing with a defiant fire that dwarfed her exhaustion. I did not fight my way across worlds for you. I did not risk a civil war for you, just to watch you kill yourself. I forbid it. Akino was suddenly on his other side, her usual smile gone. Replaced by a look of fierce, heartbreaking loyalty. We don't let our family face the darkness alone. Zenobia drove Durandal into the sand before him. I lost my faith in God once. I will not lose my faith in you. And my faith says you are meant to live. Kaneko simply grabbed his hand, her small grip surprisingly strong, her eyes conveying a simple, absolute truth. We're a team. Naruto's heart clenched. He had always been alone in his biggest sacrifices. He had faced pain alone. He had faced the final war alone. But here they were, refusing to let him go. You don't understand, he said, his voice cracking. It will kill me. Then it will have to kill us, too, Rias said, her hand gripping his. But we are stronger together. Your plan is to channel the power. But you need an anchor. Something to keep your body from being torn apart. Let us be that anchor. He looked at their faces, at their unwavering resolve, and he saw a different path. Not a guarantee of survival, but a chance. A single, desperate chance. He nodded. All right. Azazel's voice cut in, clear and commanding over their comms. She had seen the exchange, understood the new plan. She turned to Sirzex. They need time. Rally the army. We have one last job to do. Buy him time. A new fire lit in the eyes of the faction leaders. A final, hopeless, glorious charge. For our future. Sirzex roared, leading the devils forward. The army, seeing their leaders charge and Naruto's group preparing for some kind of miracle, found their courage again. They turned, and they charged, throwing themselves at the primordial mother in a final, suicidal wave of defiance. Naruto stood at the center of the storm. Now, he dropped into a cross-legged position, his hands forming a unique seal. He opened himself up, becoming a conduit. The silvery soul energy that permeated the battlefield, the echo of a billion lives, recognized its purpose. It began to swirl, forming a massive, ethereal vortex that spiraled down towards Naruto. Rias, Akino, Zenobia, and Kaneko formed a circle around him, placing their hands on his back and shoulders. They poured their own life energies into him, Rias's crimson demonic power. Akino's paradoxical holy demonic lightning, Zenobia's pure, prayerful faith, and Kaneko's raw senjutsu. Their power wasn't meant to fuel the seal, it was a desperate, living shield, reinforcing his body. His chakra network, his very soul against the cosmic torrent he was about to unleash. The primordial mother finally recognized the true threat. It ceased its piecemeal erasure of the army and focused its full, terrifying attention on the five of them, unleashing a wave of pure, unmaking void. The loyalist army met it head-on. They were vaporized by the hundreds, but their sacrifice bought precious seconds. The soul energy hit Naruto. Pain, unlike anything he had ever known, erupted in every cell of his being. It was the collective memory of a billion deaths, the love, the rage, the sorrow of a lost generation. All flooding through him. He screamed, his body arching in agony. But the girl's power held him together, a warm, living net of love and loyalty against the storm. His body glowed, a tapestry of silver, gold, crimson, and white. He channeled it all, shaping the pain, the memories, the power, into a single, complex sealing formula that was writing itself on his soul. He rose to his feet, his body a beacon of impossible light. He was no longer just Naruto. He was a living conduit for the ghost of a world that was, a living seal for the world that would be. He flickered forward, appearing directly before the primordial mother. He looked into its face of shadow and void and saw not malice, but a terrifying, alien emptiness. He thrust his hand forward, palm open, onto the creature's chest. Genesis seal. 8 trigrams of finite requiem. There was no sound. There was no explosion. There was only light. An absolute, pure, white light that consumed everything. The seal on Naruto's palm flared to life, a vortex that began to pull. It did not pull matter or energy, it pulled the primordial mother's very concept into itself. The entity shrieked, a silent, mental scream that echoed across dimensions, as its impossible form was compressed, folded, and drawn into the seal. The light collapsed inward, shrinking to a single, brilliant point on Naruto's palm, which then faded, leaving behind a complex, swirling black tattoo. Then, silence. The gray, colorless world was suddenly flooded with color and sound. The sun, a real, warm, yellow sun, broke through the clouds. The sky was a brilliant blue. The unnatural pressure on reality was gone. The battle was over. The primordial mother was gone. Naruto stood for a single, victorious moment, then his eyes rolled back in his head. And he collapsed. The girls, their energy completely spent, fell unconscious around him. The war was won. The energy Naruto had absorbed, the life force of the lost males, did not remain sealed within him. With the mother gone, it was released. Not as a torrent, but as a gentle, golden rain that began to fall on the battlefield. It did not resurrect the dead. But where it touched the wounded, it healed them. Where it touched the barren, shell-blasted desert, small, green shoots of life began to sprout. The golden rain spread, a gentle, healing wave that washed over the entire planet, cleansing the psychic taint of the mothers, mending the fractured dimensions, and carrying with it a single, cosmic promise. The curse was broken. The great fade was over. A new genesis had begun. Months later, the sun was warm on Naruto's face. He sat under a large tree on the grounds of the Grimoire estate, a place that now felt more like home than any other. The world was healing. The civil wars had ended the moment the mother's influence had vanished, leaving behind a profound sense of shared shame and a powerful, unifying drive to rebuild. The factions were no longer just allies. They were partners in building a new world. And for the first time in over a century, a child had been born. A natural, trueborn child. It was a girl, but it was a start. The possibility was back. Hope was no longer a dream. It was a reality. Naruto's life force was permanently diminished. He could no longer call upon the full, overwhelming power of the Kurama avatar, and entering Sage mode was a significant strain. The battle had taken its toll, leaving scars on his soul that would never fully heal. But he felt peaceful. Rias leaned against his shoulder, reading a book. Akino was orchestrating a small, playful thunderstorm over the lake. Zenobia and Kaneko were engaged in a lighthearted sparring match nearby, their laughter ringing through the air. He was no longer the last Adam, the miracle, the anomaly. He was just Naruto, a friend, a partner, a protector. He looked at the women who had anchored him to reality, who had refused to let him sacrifice himself, and felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the sun. He was the last of his kind, but he was not alone. And for the first time, the future was not a fear to be endured, but a promise to be embraced. Together. Chapter 10 End.